February is drawing near, the hidden gem of the wheel of the year, a time of cleansing and purification, the season of rest after Yule celebrations. We begin to notice the return of the sun, and yet we know spring has not yet begun. A time to incubate within our cocoon, awaiting rebirth which is coming soon. During this season, we feather our nests, taking the time for self-care and rest, a natural time for hibernation and planting seeds for our manifestations. The new year is getting well underway, and we're growing within each passing day. A sustainable ease into our resolutions when we reinvent ourselves and spark revolutions. Aquarius time on the zodiac wheel is an invitation to evolve and heal, to wash away our old limitations and design a new life of our own creation. Greetings, magical mavens, and welcome to this February's Eve / in bulk edition of our seasonal bucket list. So on this channel, I like to look at the wheel of the year not as just 8 specific holidays that you have to celebrate on specific days each year, but instead I like to look at it as just splitting up the entire year into 8 different seasons, each of which is about 6 weeks long. So this totally liberates us from the idea that we have to cram all of our magical ideas into just one day or 1 week out of the season, and it instead gives us permission to experience more mindfulness and magic throughout the entire season, and it gives us the ability to experience more fulfillment in our everyday lives by actually embodying the themes of each season in a more consistent and sustainable manner. February's Eve, aka in bulk, Candlemas, or even Groundhog Day to some people, is the midpoint between the winter solstice and the spring equinox, celebrated around February 1st. It's one of the 4 cross-quarter days of the pagan year, which are the ones that are in between of the equinoxes and the solstices. This one marks the midpoint between the darkest days of winter and the start of spring. February represents the opportunity for a very welcome pause after the midwinter celebrations. Now that the merrymaking festivities and gathering of gifts is behind us, it's time for us to really enjoy the peace and quiet that winter is really primed for. In popular culture, it's common for people to be encouraged to work hard and play hard for the entire month of December, leading up to Yule / Christmas and then New Year's Day, and then to suddenly quit everything cold turkey on January 1st and throw ourselves into our New Year's resolutions, which is kind of a recipe for failure. Alternately, by working more gradually through the wheel of the year, we have the ability to ease our way into our intentions for the new year in a more natural and sustainable way. February's Eve is the perfect time to clear away the midwinter decorations and do some early spring cleaning, as well as take some calm, quiet time for self-care before the excitement of spring really kicks in. So of course, first things first, since this is the Writing Witch channel, the first tip is always to do your seasonal journaling. For each of the 8 seasons on the Witch's calendar, I like to look at 3 important themes for each one, and I turn each of those into a journal prompt to help me embody that energy as I'm stepping into that season. The 3 themes I like to focus on most this time of year are cleansing, self-care, and the quickening, which refers to the time in the womb when the baby starts to move around and kick. It represents this sort of incubation phase that we're in as we're being reborn as our new selves and beginning to start slowly taking action on our intentions. Now in this particular video, I'm going to be sharing with you just some of my favorite fun and magical traditions for the season, which are somewhat based around these themes. But for a much deeper dive into what these themes mean and how to deeply embody them this season in order to experience more joy and fulfillment, I invite you to check out the video I did last year, which will pop up on the screen at the end of this video. In that video, I'm actually reading to you from my own journal, where I am tapping into my favorite journal prompts around these themes and showing you how I'm embodying them in my real life. And of course, you're also invited to join us for the Writing Witch Coven, where we're doing our late winter seasonal living challenge, which is where we do these prompts together. This helps us to stay consistent in our witchy seasonal living lifestyle as we're embodying these themes in our own lives in our own ways. Your membership will also include access to these lovely information sheets and grimoire prompt pages, which I've designed for this season, including printable files and physical copies. To learn more and sign up, I invite you to check out the link that's on the screen now, which will also be linked down below. The next tip is, of course, to do the traditional February's Eve ritual bath. Imbolc was traditionally considered a time of cleansing and purification because it was a time when people would prepare for the coming spring by cleaning their homes and their livestock pens. This was also a time when the first lambs were born and milk began to flow again, symbolizing the return of abundance and fertility. This concept of fresh new life can also be tied into the theme of pureness and having a clean start. In a modern practice, I like to look at this season as a time of releasing and cleansing away any remaining stagnant energy or patterns from the year past. Years like this one, where the beginning of the year took place during a Mercury retrograde, are a prime example of the importance of making a gradual, sustainable shift into our New Year's resolutions instead of trying to force everything to happen right away and then getting burnt out or frustrated. But regardless of the astrology from year to year, I feel it's always important to give ourselves grace and space as we plant the seeds and slowly grow into our new intentions. Sometimes we start the process of releasing the old year back in December or January, or even as far back as Samhain, the season of shadow work and the death of the old year. But we might still be finding ourselves experiencing remnants of the old patterns into the early months of the new year. It doesn't necessarily mean that we're doing anything wrong. It often just means that the transformation is happening in its own timeline, and we have to cultivate patience and commitment to finish releasing that old energy and making room for the new. For me, cleansing baths are a great way to create space for this transformation. While the journaling we talked about earlier is a great way to cleanse and reset the mind space, bathing rituals are also necessary to energetically cleanse the body and spirit. Plus, it's a very soothing evening ritual that can help you train your mind and heart to gently hold space for your new self as it incubates. The warm bath almost mimics the concept of being in the womb as we're being reborn into our next level selves. Taking a ritual bath with cleansing herbs is a powerful way to connect with the energy of Imbolc and to prepare for the coming spring. Rosemary, for example, is a great herb for purification and protection, while lavender is known for its calming and soothing properties. Chamomile is also a great choice for relaxation and releasing tension, which is often what's needed in order for any old baggage to be released from your life. If you're still holding on to any bitterness, disappointment, or trauma in your mind, heart, or body, it can manifest as old patterns seeming to repeat themselves. So training yourself to relax and feel safe in the controlled environment of a well-curated sacred space, such as a bath, can facilitate your transformation this time of year. As you soak in the warm water, you can also add water-safe crystals such as quartz or amethyst to amplify the cleansing and healing energy. Visualize yourself releasing any negative energy or emotions and welcoming in new beginnings and opportunities. This is a wonderful way to set intentions for the season ahead and to create a fresh start for yourself. My personal favorite herb to work with this time of year is lavender, as it's known to create a calming and soothing effect. For many of us, the holiday season can be a time of busyness and chaos, and we can fall into a habit of overdoing things. In my case, I often find myself working late during the early winter, not just because of all the work that needs to be done in my shop during the holidays and then the new content that I start putting out for the new year, but also simply because the seemingly endless dark evenings can really throw off my ability to tell the difference between day and night. If I'm working at my desk at 4:30 p.m. and it's pitch black, and then I'm still working at my desk at, 12 midnight and it's still pitch black, the time kind of just blends into each other and I don't really know how long I've been sitting there. And my night owl tendencies can get a little bit out of hand this time of year. So since lavender is an herb often associated with sleep and rest, it can aid in my intentions to clean up my sleep hygiene and normalize the feeling of taking restful downtime after the holiday season when it became normalized to be busy all the time. Lavender is not only a beautiful and fragrant herb, but it also has many healing properties. It's known to reduce stress and anxiety and promote relaxation and improve sleep quality. So by incorporating lavender into your in bulk rituals, you can create a peaceful and calming atmosphere that'll help you connect with the energy of the season. Whether you use lavender essential oil in the diffuser, add dried lavender to your bath, or even simply place a bouquet of fresh or dried lavender in your bathroom, this herb is a wonderful addition to your rituals. So take some time to indulge in the soothing properties of lavender and allow yourself to rest and recharge during this time of transition. I also love to create magical bath salt blends this time of year, using lavender oil as the main scent. You can make an entire ritual out of crafting the mixture and adding your blessings and intentions into it before bottling it up and using portions of it in your baths for the rest of the winter season. In the pagan community, there's a tradition of saving some snow water from in bulk to use in your cleansing spells. This water is believed to be imbued with the energy of the season and can be used to purify your space, your tools, or yourself. You can collect snow water in a jar or a bottle and use it throughout the year for your cleansing rituals, or you can just use it all during this current season. This is a powerful way to connect with the energy of in bulk and to honor the changing of the seasons. My favorite way to use this snow, or even rainwater if that's what you have access to this time of year, is to simply add it to that ritual bath. For a full step-by-step tutorial that goes into much greater depth on all the different ways that you can get the most out of your in bulk bathing ritual, I invite you to check out the video I did last year on this subject, which I've linked on the screen. And of course, the next tip is to decorate an altar for the season, or be like me and just go all out and decorate your entire house. Creating an in bulk altar is a beautiful way to honor the season and or connect with the energy of the goddess Bridget if her archetype speaks to you. Now, I personally have never been particularly called to work with Bridget for my practice yet. Maybe someday I will be. That's usually how these things go. But for now, my altar setup tends to be more so focused on honoring the final days of winter, as well as the return of the sun and the springtime ahead. And rather than specifically using symbolism related to Bridget, I like to focus on the nurturing, creative, divine feminine archetype as a whole. I like to include on my altar the eggshell ornament that I made to represent mothering energy and rebirth, as well as my Saraswati statue to represent the divine feminine. You can include items such as snowdrops, white or blue candles, a Bridget's cross, and a bowl of snow or ice, or ornaments that represent snow and ice. You can also add crystals such as quartz, selenite, and amethyst to represent that healing, clarity, and intuition that are associated with this time of year. And it's fun that some of those crystals double as ice symbolism, for example. As you decorate your altar, take time to reflect on the themes of in bulk and set intentions for the coming season. Personally, I like to kind of make my entire home into one big altar to the season. As a home and hearth witch, the home is a magical sanctuary to me. So whenever possible, I go all out with meaningful decorations so that my surroundings embrace the season that we're in. Mainly, during this time of year, I like to put away any leftover Yule/winter solstice decorations that are still lying around, particularly the ones that really evoke the Yule season as opposed to the more clearing and cleansing energy that I'm going for the in bulk season. And I like to dust under them before potentially replacing them with more neutral winter decor. For the past few years, this has included removing the red and gold ornaments from my tree and adding blue and silver ones to evoke a more peaceful, clean feeling mood in the space. I like to keep a Christmas tree up year-round and change it out for every Sabbath. And even though this one is still celebrating winter and the icy and snowy stuff and maybe even some of the natural materials are good to stay, anything that really evokes that sort of deep, dark, overindulgent vibe of the winter solstice, it's time for that to go. The next tip is to go outside or look out of your windows and look for signs of spring. And I put that in quotations because for a lot of us, myself included, it's definitely not springy weather at the beginning of February. But if we're able to look a little bit closer and bring that mindfulness to our approach to nature, we will notice some subtle changes. Even though winter may still be in full swing, there are often signs of spring emerging around Imbolc. Take a walk in nature and look for signs of new growth, such as buds on trees, early flowers if you're lucky enough to have those, or nesting birds. This is a reminder that even in the darkest times, there's always a promise of new life and growth. As you take a walk in nature, pay attention to the subtle changes happening around you. Notice the way the sunlight is shifting, the bird song is becoming more frequent, and the air is feeling potentially slightly warmer, again, depending on where you live. These signs of spring may be small, but they're also powerful reminders that the wheel of the year is still turning and new beginnings are on the horizon. Take a moment to appreciate the beauty of the changing seasons, no matter how subtle, and connect with the energy of growth and renewal that's present during this time of year. This is one of those seasons where you live is going to make a huge difference in what you're experiencing outside. And I think it's important to not just fantasize about those stereotypical Imbolc aesthetics that we see online, but instead to get really mindful and observant and see what's really present for us. For example, snowdrop flowers are really popular for this season's aesthetic because they're known to grow in the UK this time of year, and especially the 4 cross-quarter sabbats on the Wheel of the Year are mainly derived from Celtic-inspired traditions. But where I live in New York, we definitely don't see any of those early spring flowers until around the next Sabbat, which is the spring equinox at the end of March. And even then, they might still be hidden underneath a mountain of snow if we're not lucky. While there's absolutely nothing wrong with decorating with fake flowers or even growing bulbs indoors on your windowsill, I think it's still important to acknowledge and honor the way Mother Earth is actually presenting herself in my actual environment outdoors. So for me, I like to continue honoring the evergreens, the winter berries, possibly snow and ice if we still have that, as well as noticing the tiny buds that are becoming visible on the otherwise barren-looking tree branches. They won't swell and open up until 1 or 2 months from now, depending on what type of tree it is and what the weather is doing. But if I look closely, I can see and honor those little tiny buds in their earliest stages. My next tip for this season is reinvention spells. Imbolc falls in the middle of Aquarius season, the zodiac sign related to revolution, innovation, and rebellion from outdated patterns. Aquarius season is especially potent for those like me who have strong Aquarius placements in our birth chart, but you don't have to be an Aquarius sun, moon, or rising to tap into the magic of reinvention this time of year. Anyone can perform a reinvention spell to manifest positive changes in their life as their New Year's resolutions are beginning to take shape. This can include anything from elaborate rituals at your altar to simply adding to or decluttering your wardrobe. You may also wish to keep in mind that all 4 of the cross-quarter sabbats are considered fire festivals, so a good old-fashioned burning ceremony is always a great option. I've done various different things to reinvent myself in past years, but one thing that's always worked wonders for me is simply doing the journal prompts that I created years and years ago for the season. No matter how many times I do them over and over again, there's always new wisdom to be discovered for where I'm currently at in my life. And to add even more depth to this practice, a couple of years ago, I also added a second set of prompt pages to my library that evoke both the energies of the season and the alchemical elements to give you an even more deeply transformative journaling practice. This page set features themes such as creating transformational mantras, improving communication, setting healthy boundaries, and more. You can purchase printable files of these pages in the Writing Witch shop. When it comes to reinvention rituals, you can do this at any time during the season and in any number of ways that resonates with you and your intention. But if you're looking for a great date astrologically, look no further than the new moon in Aquarius that takes place during the same time that the sun is in Aquarius every year. This year, it will be on February 9th. If you're looking for ideas on how to embrace lunar phases and lunar astrology to get much more deep value out of your lunar living practice, then I would, again, love to invite you to join the Writing Witch Coven on Patreon. All tiers include access to helpful journal prompts designed to guide you on how best to embrace both the 4 main moon phases and the unique zodiac signs that they fall into each month as you plant, tend, and harvest your intentions and release that which no longer serves you. Another amazing thing to do this time of year is to take a look at your wellness habits and your daily rituals and routines and tweak them or update them to fit the version of yourself that you're turning into in this new year that we've just stepped into. Imbolc is a powerful season to focus on your personal growth and development. By updating your wellness habits and daily routines, you can become your next level self and manifest positive changes in your life. Whether it's starting a new exercise routine, trying a healthy new recipe, or committing to a daily meditation practice, small changes can lead to big results. By taking care of your physical, emotional, and spiritual health, you can create a strong foundation for the season ahead and the year ahead while honoring the energy of Imbolc. I tend to think of this time of year as an ideal time to focus on our morning and/or evening routines. One of the most powerful lessons that I've learned along my journey is that what we ritualize expands. It's similar to the idea of manifesting, that what you focus on grows. By committing to forming consistent habits that are directly aligned with your desired lifestyle, you're not only energetically attracting your intentions into your reality, but you're also literally practicing what you preach and giving physical, mental, emotional, and spiritual energy to whatever it is that you're trying to create. For example, when I was wanting to manifest a home with a garden, I took the Imbolc season to start learning as much as I could about gardening and began experimenting with what I could grow even while I was still living in an apartment. I committed to focusing on it in some way every single day, even if some days that just looked like watching a short YouTube video about gardening during lunch. By the summertime that year, I was growing some of my own vegetables and herbs on my balcony. And by the following Imbolc season, I was starting seeds for a much more epic garden that would actually maximize the capabilities of the balcony that I had in that apartment the following summer. And now I have manifested a home with a huge yard where I can finally live out that dream that I had years ago. And I know that it's thanks to taking those little baby steps of focusing on the concept of gardening every single day a couple of Imbolcs ago. This is also a great time of year to really get into some self-love rituals or to make up some self-love affirmations or incantations that can help you to step into the next level version of yourself this year. Since Valentine's Day also falls within the 6 weeks surrounding Imbolc, I think the concept of self-love also ties in really well with the theme of the season. Valentine's Day is often associated with romantic love, but it can also be a time to focus on self-love and self-care. During this time of year when we're holding space for ourselves to heal and grow into our next greatest version, this is the perfect time to assess how loving we've been towards ourselves and to amp up our self-love practices. Maybe you've been doing a self-care and self-love practice that maybe has kind of lost its oomph for you. Maybe you've kind of gotten bored with it, or maybe you just need something different now. Or maybe you've totally fallen off from your self-love and self-care practices. Well, this is the perfect time of year to take a look at that and decide what's actually going to benefit you in the now, regardless of what may or may not have worked in the past. Whether it's taking a relaxing bath, updating your skincare routines, cooking healthier meals, finally prioritizing that dental cleaning that you've been putting off, pointing the finger at myself on that one, or simply spending time doing something we love, self-love rituals can help us to connect with our inner selves and cultivate a sense of peace and contentment. By prioritizing self-love during this season, you can set the tone for the rest of the year and create a strong foundation for your personal growth and development. My next tip, if you can, is to feed wildlife. Whether you have the ability to create a bird feeder for your own garden, or if you actually just need to go for a nature walk and leave behind things that you know are healthy and safe for the local wildlife in your environment. Imbolc is a time when many animals are just emerging from hibernation and may be in need of nourishment. Or if there are animals that have just been hanging around all winter, there's a good chance that maybe their food stores are starting to run low by this point. So you can leave out seeds, nuts, or fruits for birds and squirrels, or create a small offering for other animals such as deer and rabbits. It's important to research and make sure that you are leaving out foods that are healthy and safe for the animals in your area. This can simply be an act of kindness and gratitude for Mother Earth and the creatures we share this planet with. Or you can get extra witchy with it. Turn this into a bit of a spell. As you're crafting your wildlife feeder or placing your edible offerings out in nature, you can also be setting intentions for your own relationship with the earth for the year ahead. You can make this part of a greater commitment to living a more eco-friendly lifestyle. Or you can give an offering to the spirit of the land you're on in hopes of growing an abundant garden this year. The possibilities are really endless depending on what your desires are and how you wish to express that gratitude to Mother Earth. My next favorite thing to do this time of year is to read or journal by candlelight. The season of Imbolc tends to be associated with candles. There's a tradition of lighting a candle and placing it in the snow or the cold ground outside, or even on a windowsill, to represent evoking Mother Earth to thaw out and wake up. I've also learned that in the Christian adaptation of Imbolc, known as St. Bridget's Day, there's a tradition where people back in the day would make their candles for the whole year during this time, and then they would take them to their place of worship to be blessed, which seems a little bit witchy to me. I wonder if they got that from somewhere. I honestly don't know. If you have a historical reference for that, please leave it down in the comments. But in any case, candles are a powerful symbol of light and warmth during the dark days of winter. Lighting a candle during Imbolc can represent the return of the sun and the awakening of the earth. In addition to that tradition of placing a candle in the snow or on the windowsill, some pagans also use this time to make their own candles, even in today's day and age. We don't desperately need them, but we enjoy them. And this is a great time if that is something that you would be interested in learning how to craft for yourself. This can be a fun and creative way to connect with the energy of Imbolc and to infuse your candles with your intentions for the coming year. Whether you just light a candle or if you actually make your own, this is a beautiful way to honor the season and bring light into your life during this time of year when the earth is still slowly becoming brighter and waking up. Since the fire festival of Imbolc falls within the darker half of the year, and also takes place during Aquarius season, which is a zodiac sign related to the element of air, which represents wisdom, learning, innovation, and communication, it makes perfect sense to bring the elements of fire and air together. I love this time of year for spending quiet evenings or even early mornings before the sun rises if you're someone who's able to do that, to light candles and spend time reading or journaling by candlelight. This can be a very soothing and meditative practice, helping you to connect with your inner wisdom and intuition. There's just something so magical about the introspective, intimate ambience of candlelight in a dark room. Almost like it curates access into another realm that's somehow separate from our regular modern lives, and it connects us to our ancestors who would have relied on firelight during dark times. If you don't happen to be a super early morning person like I'm not, or if you don't happen to be a night owl like I am, this season can kind of be your last opportunity to spend a lot of time in candlelight before the sun does begin to dominate the evening hours again. So I invite you to embrace the special magic of candlelight while you read or journal for self-improvement, for self-care, or just for fun. This is also the perfect time of year to do a cleaning and reset of your home and just of your life in general. This can involve decluttering, organizing, detoxing, and energetically cleansing yourself and your space. This season is always a great time to get a head start on some spring cleaning and to donate anything that's no longer useful or joyful to have in your space. It's also a great time to kick any bad or just less than helpful habits that you may have picked up in the past year or during the holiday season. You can physically detox by cleaning up your diet for the new year, beginning to move your body more, or even spending time in a sauna if that's something you have access to. There just seems like something so magical and bulky about it being cold and dark outside, but you're in this like warm, woody smelling room with the light of the fire and that water vapor bringing in the air and water and fire elements. I don't know, that just seems awesome. I don't have a sauna and I don't belong to a gym, but I would love to do that sometime, especially this time of year. You can also perform a banishing spell to release any negative energy or patterns that no longer serve you. Again, Imbolc is a fire festival, and as someone with strong air and fire placements in my astrology, I am always a proponent of writing things down and burning it. One of my favorite rituals is an automatic writing burn ceremony, which is where you set a timer and brain dump any negative thoughts that are occupying space in your mind onto a piece of paper without stopping to think about it or to censor yourself. Once the timer is up, you can burn the page to represent destroying those old thought forms and transforming them into ash, which can become compost for fresh new life to grow, either literally or figuratively. If you can literally compost or scatter the ashes outside, even better. But there is no shame in just simply flushing it down the toilet too. Greetings, magical mavens, and welcome to this spring bucket list witchy edition. So if you're new to my channel, I like to focus on the Wheel of the Year sabbats, not as just specific days, but as entire seasons, which are about 6 weeks long. This gives us the opportunity to, first of all, celebrate for the whole season, which makes just our day-to-day lives a lot more fun, but it also liberates us from this feeling of having to do all of the things to celebrate a sabbat on that one day or that one weekend or even that whole 1 week. The spring equinox, also known as Ostara, is what we consider the first day of spring, and astrologically it is also the first day of Aries, which is the first sign of the zodiac. So in a way, it's almost like another New Year celebration. And of course, Aries is a fire sign. My moon is in Aries, so I really kind of get amped up and excited this time of year. And one thing I love to do to celebrate is doing something with fire, because I'm a little bit of a pyro. So if you're a little bit of a pyro too, definitely stay tuned to the end of the video where I'm going to actually do a tutorial on my favorite candle spell for this time of the year. Alright, so first things first, obviously this channel is called The Writing Witch, so it wouldn't be appropriate to make tip number 1 anything besides journaling on seasonal themes. If you've been around for a while, you've probably caught last year's videos where I actually went through the entire Wheel of the Year and actually gave you guys my favorite 3 journal prompts to do for each of the 8 seasons. So my favorite themes to focus on this time of year are recalibration, the inner child, and emergence. So we're not going to go super deep into those because I did make that video, which you can check out right here. But in a nutshell, this is the time of year when we are being invited by nature to kind of come out of our shell, almost like a seedling emerging through the soil and starting a new life. It's also a season where we're being invited to reset our energy. The winter can be a time that's kind of got a little bit of a funky energy for some people, and even if you happen to love winter, there are still sort of just different habits and behaviors that we sort of pick up in the winter as coping mechanisms that are appropriate for that time, but are not necessarily appropriate for this next phase of our lives as we're moving into the warm season. So it's a great opportunity to just sort of reinvent ourselves a little bit. And of course, the inner child is one of the best themes to focus on this time of year, because even in nature, we're seeing new creatures being born and new plant growth and just this fresh new energy. And it almost makes us want to connect with our own inner child and remember the things that made us feel excited to be alive before all the adulting kind of distracted us. Connecting with the inner child can admittedly be kind of challenging, even for the most magical among us. I am one of those people who allows my inner child to craft a lot of the aspects of my life, but I still do get in ruts sometimes when I look at this crazy world that we're living in, and it does kind of suck my magic out a little bit. So to help me stay in tune with my inner child as I am crafting a life that I want my childhood self to be proud of, I've created this inner child time travel ritual where I literally do a meditation where I go back to a childhood memory and I sort of show up as a guardian angel to my childhood self and kind of have a little conversation with her, see what she's thinking and feeling, see if she has any advice or symbols that I can use in my adult life that will keep me connected to her and help make her proud in my adult life. So tip number 3 is working with florals. I know, it's that classic Devil Wears Prada quote where it's like, florals for spring, groundbreaking. I know, guys, I know, but there is just nothing that really brings in that spring energy like flowers, and not just any flowers, but particularly ones that kind of look like spring flowers. Now, full disclosure, these are fake. Where I live in Western New York, even at the spring equinox, which is celebrated at the end of March, it might still be blizzarding outside. Not always, but it sometimes is. So the way that you might want to go about working with florals in your practice might be totally different from the way I do. Yes, sometimes I just take the simple solution and use something fake just to kind of bring that energy in. But to do something more natural, I've also worked with dried florals this time of year, particularly lavender I happen to really, really love, but any dried flowers from the previous year's harvest definitely still bring that energy in a more authentic way, because it's real and it's natural and it has that beautiful scent to it that brings you into that spring energy, but it doesn't feel like you're being pretentious about what the weather is actually doing. Because honestly, the spring equinox itself, I think, is when even snowdrops just first start to appear in my area, which I know for some of you guys, snowdrops appear in February or January. So use your own discretion for this. Another alternative to flowers is just bringing the concept of plants back into your life in general, whether that be working with herbs or anything like that. Another really simple thing you can do is work with scents. So bring in floral or springy scents that are refreshing to you. I like to use, again, my lavender incense is a good go-to. And if you have an oil diffuser, working with floral essential oils this time of year can be really nice. I also find that I like to work with scents like rosemary and thyme in my diffuser this time of year. And I think maybe the reason for that is because at this point in the year, I'm really longing for those garden vibes that are not really here yet, and that kind of gets me excited for it. And actually, when I used to have a large yard and a garden that was at the ground level and got a lot of consistent sunlight, I actually had a thyme plant that stayed alive underneath the snow, and I could literally just go out and kind of dig it up whenever I needed to. I don't know if thyme normally does that or if that was just a magical happy accident, but ever since then, working with thyme for me has become something that's kind of seasonless and timeless, but I definitely like to work with it in the spring to start reminding me of what it was like to be outside and have a garden. And that moves us right into tip number 4, which is garden planning. So whether you live in an apartment like I do now, or if you have a big, beautiful garden, anybody in any situation can garden. it is just going to look different for each one of us. So this might mean starting seeds on your windowsill that will later be planted outside depending on your climate, or it might literally just be having a window garden. I have lived in apartments in the past that didn't have a patio. I manifested this apartment with a patio because for me it is a non-negotiable to have as much garden space as I possibly can, but I have had times when all I've had was a windowsill, and I have successfully grown quite a variety actually of different smallish plants, including herbs, flowers, and even some other edible vegetables like lettuce and things like that. So if you're looking for a way to really connect with nature, this is a great thing to do. And if you happen to be good with houseplants, this is also a great time to just attend to your houseplants. For example, in my current apartment, the sad truth is that I just don't get enough light in here. And in previous years, when I was first starting to collect houseplants and everything was doing great in the summertime, as soon as the autumn equinox rolled around, they didn't get enough light and some of my plants actually died on me. So I formed a tradition now where in the summertime and the springtime, I might put plants in different places around my home to really bring that sort of planty energy throughout the house. But in the colder months, they're pretty much all crammed into my west-facing window in my office. So spring equinox is a great time to maybe, first of all, attend to those plants, see how they're doing, maybe clean up any dead leaves that they might have, maybe even start to fertilize them, because plant people know that you should avoid fertilizing your plants when they're not growing as much because that can actually kill them. So the spring equinox is a good time to start fertilizing, moving them to different places, etc. And of course, if you're a little bit of a plant junkie, the spring equinox is always a great time to bring new plants into your home. I'm probably not going to be bringing too many plants into my home right now just because, like I said, I learned the hard way a couple of years ago that there's just not enough light in here once winter does come. And so it would be kind of sad to have all these plants in the summer and the spring and then not know what to do with them once the light changes, but we will see. And even if you can't do any of those things, this is a good time of year to just start learning about plants. For example, I am in the process of manifesting a home where I do have, again, a ground level garden and much more sunlight than I have here on my enclosed patio. But I am taking this time of year to watch garden videos on YouTube to get excited for that bigger garden that I'm going to manifest one day. I have a pretty good idea now of what I can actually grow on my patio and what I can't, but that doesn't mean that I can't learn about plants that I want to grow in the future that I'm not able to grow now, because that's all part of the manifestation process. It's creating space within our lives for that which we want to enter our lives. Personally, I am really looking forward to being able to grow squash. I have never successfully grown squash on this patio because I just don't get enough south-facing light, but that's something that I do still like to research and just kind of plant the seeds of intention, even if I'm not planting those actual seeds this year. And as a little bonus tip to that, there's also composting. Now, I know composting can be really, really difficult in certain living situations, and I struggled with that a lot until I kind of came up with the system that I have now. Now that I live in an apartment where I do have my own private patio, I am able to do some composting in a really large bucket. And in the spring and the summertime and even the fall, I am actively saving just about any and every biodegradable substance that becomes waste in my home for the compost. But in the winter, I do have to cut back on that because when it's freezing and wet or rainy or snowy, or like we're under pounds and pounds of snow like we were at the winter solstice this past year, it's not really possible for me to get out there and empty my kitchen compost buckets into the big compost and really like churn and tend to that compost. So I really only put food scraps and I avoid anything that's like large or bulky or anything like that. But the spring equinox is for me this year probably going to be the time when I empty out my 2 kitchen compost buckets that have been rotting for months and can actually start that practice of composting more consistently, including things like paper and garden matter, etc. I'm probably going to make a whole video on compost at some point, because for me, working with compost is part of that plant, tend, harvest, compost cycle that I work with both physically and mentally as a witchy self-development enthusiast. And the first time that I discovered compost, it literally changed my life when I realized that we don't have to think of everything that goes to quote unquote waste in our kitchen as something that has to end up in a landfill or something that is useless or harmful to the environment, when actually the natural order of things is for that to become new life by decomposing and becoming food for new plants and, you know, bugs, etc. So if you're curious about the spiritual and physical benefits of composting, both for an eco-friendly lifestyle and for a more spiritually connected lifestyle, I invite you to leave a comment, because I'm not sure how many of you guys are interested in that, but it's something that I do get very excited about and would love an excuse to talk about that. And the subject of gardening and compost does kind of cross over into our next tip, which is seasonal eating. So if you happen to eat eggs, as you know, this is a time of year when a lot of the time we are making eggs, whether you are dyeing eggs and decorating them and then eating them later, or if you're just using eggs and you're cooking more this time of year, the symbol of the egg is a universal symbol for fertility and rebirth. So if you're a kitchen witch, or if you'd like to start using some kitschy witchy tips in your life, one really simple way to do it is simply to work with eggs in a sort of mindful way this time of year. So when I first started my witchy practice years and years ago, I was also dating someone whose family was really into the like mainstream seasonal holidays like Easter. And for Easter, they would always dye boiled eggs and then give them to their friends and family. So me and my partner at the time ended up with a ton of hard-boiled eggs. And so for the next few weeks, every day for lunch, we would make egg sandwiches out of these beautiful dyed eggs. And since I was also learning about the Wheel of the Year at that time, that sort of became a tradition for me. Not really dyeing eggs, I've never actually done that myself, at least not as an adult, but I do always boil some eggs and just keep them on hand to have for my spring lunches. And I just bring some mindfulness into the preparation and the eating of that, even if it's just like a mundane day and I'm just taking a break to make an egg sandwich. I actually think about the intentions that sort of match up with the foods and the herbs that are going into that simple sandwich, and I use that as a little intention setting ritual to sort of reset myself in the middle of the day, which is really powerful if you've been like working all day and you need a sort of reset and a little something magical in the middle of your day. And I actually did go into depth on all of the details of that in my video from last year, so I invite you to check that out if you're curious. I have also been vegan at points in my life. I'm currently vegetarian, but if you don't eat eggs, there's other things you can do as well, including just bringing some fresh greens into your diet if you haven't been really staying up on your eating of greens during the winter. Personally, in this really cold environment that I live in, I tend to eat a lot of like squashes and root vegetables and honestly just carbs in general in the winter time. And so I really like to take the spring equinox as an opportunity to incorporate salads and things like that back into my diet now that I'm no longer like freezing and needing really heavy and hot foods all the time. And it's not only good for our mindset to sort of connect us to this fresh new energy of springtime, but it's also really good for our bodies to sort of do a little bit of like a sort of detox thing by bringing healthier and simpler foods into our diet this time of year. And on that note, that segues into our next tip, which is just being creative with eggs in general. Last year I did a full video on several different witchy crafts that you can do this time of year, all using natural eggs and eggshells. In that video, I showed you everything from the magical egg sandwich to this insanely elaborate Fabergé egg-inspired eggshell symbol for my altar and everything in between. Eggs are also accessible and eco-friendly, and if you happen to be in the broom closet, doing egg crafts this time of year is not going to out you as a witch because lots of people are doing it too. Since Christianity also has Easter, which most of its traditions are derived from the same sort of pagan origins and fertility rituals that pagans are celebrating. So it's definitely a fun time to just do some classic egg crafts. And again, if you're vegan, you can use plastic or wooden eggs. Obviously, I recommend wooden since they are more eco-friendly, but admittedly, a couple of years ago, I didn't have the funds to get like a ton of wooden eggs, and I wanted to redecorate my solstice trees, which are basically Christmas trees that I keep up year round, and I change them out for decorations for each of the Sabbath seasons. I wanted to cover those with decorative eggs, and as I mentioned in my egg crafting video, blowing out real organic eggs is really difficult, and I didn't want to do that like 30 times to make all these ornaments for my tree. So I did end up just going to the dollar store and getting some of those plastic eggs. And what's cool about those is that you can use them for intention setting spells. So you can just pop them open, put some herbs or some crystals or a little piece of paper with your intention in it, close it back, hang it on your tree or put it on your altar or whatever, and you can use that as a sort of manifesting spell box, which is really, really fun. So the next tip is really simple, and it's literally just to connect with the sun and or the air. So again, if like me, you live in a cold environment, you've been shut up inside of your house with all the windows sealed for months now, and it's time to get some fresh energy flowing through your house in the form of the air element. I'm an Aquarius, which is an air sign, so I do start to really, really long for fresh air around this time of the year. Unless it happens to be a blizzard that day, there are usually at least a few days during late March when I can actually open the windows, and on a particularly warm day, I might open every single window in my house and allow that cross breeze to just blow around in here and really just refresh and reset, not just the physical air itself, but also energetically. I really feel like that changes the energy in the space and just kind of resets me for the springtime. Obviously, you can also go outside, weather permitting. So again, this is typically the time of year, unless it's blizzarding, that I will start to take more nature walks and start preparing my garden for springtime, even if that just means like sweeping up and tidying and moving some of the items around to kind of get a feel for where things are going to go, because I'm not going to be planting anything directly outside this time of year, not just yet. And then there's also sunbathing. So if you happen to be lucky enough that it's comfortable for you to literally lay out in the sun this time of year, good for you. But again, if you're like me, you might have to get a little bit creative. Now, what I do tend to notice this time of year is that the sunset is obviously happening later in the evening as opposed to like 4:30 p.m., which is when it sets at the winter solstice. And so I notice that when I am in my office, for example, which has west-facing windows, that there is just so much beautiful golden hour light filling that room in the evening time, and it's much brighter and stronger than it has been all winter. So anytime that I notice that, even if I'm in the middle of a work project, I like to just stand for a moment with that sun on my body or on my face. If possible, I do actually look directly at the sun if it isn't too bright, because I heard a long time ago that like staring at the sun for a couple of seconds is supposed to sort of like cleanse and refresh your energy and release endorphins and all of that. It's called sun gazing. But if you're afraid to do that, or if the sun is too bright, you can actually just do it with your eyes closed and you can still kind of see the sun through your eyelids. And for me, that just feels so refreshing and cleansing and empowering. And so that is such a good practice. Also, if you happen to have a cat or a dog, you'll notice that this time of year is usually when they start rediscovering that evening sun patch. So my cat will often find that little spot on the floor that the sun is finally reaching to. In the winter, there literally is no sun patch because the sun is sitting so low in the sky that it doesn't actually like reach through the window and down to the floor. But as soon as my cat starts noticing sun patches, I will actually go and sit with him sometimes, maybe do some yoga or just lay there and pet him for a little while, and we just really connect and enjoy that moment of just blissful sunniness. It's the magic of the present moment, because we know that within a few minutes or hours or whatever it is, depending on what time of the year, that sun patch will be gone until the next time we see it, which might be tomorrow, or it might be cloudy that day, so it might be later on. So it's kind of a mindfulness practice of stopping our habit of constantly thinking about the future or being upset about the past or whatever it is that we're busy adulting about. And it allows us to just have this simple moment of gratitude, which is such a powerful practice just in general, but it's also really good for manifesting more good vibes into your life. So the next tip is an oldie but a goodie, just your simple spring clean and reset in your home. So whether that is as simple as just doing those cleaning tasks that you couldn't be bothered to do in the winter, or if you're even giving yourself a big upgrade of some kind, like if you have a renovation project, this is a really good time of year to get started with it. One thing I really like to do in my sort of manifesting journey for this time of the year is to look around my house and see if there's anything that isn't bringing me joy anymore, and see if it's possible to remove or replace that item. So for example, I recently cleaned out my silverware drawer, and I gave away my silverware set that was the more like trendy purple shimmery titanium vibe that I was into in my 20s, and I actually just replaced it with some vintage silverware from a secondhand shop because I'm more into vintage and classic style now. And I also, while I was in there, finally cleaned out the crumbs that I had been telling myself I was going to clean out for honestly months. And just a simple update like that, that's simple and affordable, possibly free if you already have things to change out for the season, for example, it just changes everything. It makes you more excited to cook and eat and bring mindfulness into your kitchen witch practice, or whatever it is. Another thing that I love to do this time of year is change out my wardrobe. So in the winter, obviously I'm wearing heavier sweaters because I live in a cold environment, but I also have a sort of seasonal color scheme. I'm not sure if you guys have noticed this, but in the spring and summer I'm usually wearing some kind of pastel blue or purple or white, and in the winter I do still wear white, but it's usually more of like a winter white, or it's paired with like knits and things like that. And I also kind of incorporate darker colors. So if I am going to kind of do a flashback to my goth days, that always happens in the fall or the winter. And if I'm going to wear colors like red, for example, which I normally don't wear much of, I definitely get my wear out of those things in the fall and the winter. I also have an extremely small closet in the room that I use as a bedroom here, because I use the master bedroom for art, because clearly that's where my priorities are. So my big giant closet is filled to the hilt with art supplies. So in my bedroom, some of my sweaters don't actually fit into the closet or into the dressers just because sweaters are so bulky. And like I said, spring is still pretty cold here. So a lot of my spring clothing are still sweaters. So something I like to do is stack some of my favorite seasonally colored sweaters on my dresser in a cute sort of aesthetic way. And in the winter, I have the darker colors there. And then when the spring equinox comes, I put those ones away in storage, or just put them away in the drawer, and take the brighter pastel colored ones out and put them on the dresser. It's like decorating and spring cleaning and fashion all rolled into one. I also kind of do have a fashion addiction, so I have a lot more clothing than what actually fits in my dresser and my closet. So this time of year, I like to take out my big totes and I'll just put away anything that I don't think I'm going to wear for the spring and summer season, and I put those in the basement, and then I bring back the things that I'm going to wear for spring and summer and put those into my closet and my dresser. And I find that not only is that just really fun and satisfying to do, but it also changes my energy. By making those darker colors no longer available as things to grab, it kind of forces me to shift into a different expression of my personality in these lighter and brighter parts of the season. So it's sort of a mini glamour spell, you could say. So the next tip is one of my personal favorites, and that is decorating and creating an altar. So if you're in the broom closet, you might not necessarily be able to do a full-blown witchy altar for Ostara, for example, but pretty much anyone can do some sort of decorating in their home that makes it feel like you're celebrating the springtime. That can be as simple as just getting rid of any of the last wintry decorations that you might still have in your house, and maybe again replacing it with some spring flowers or some brighter colored napkins on your table or anything like that, all the way to just going all out and getting really crazy and decorating with that sort of traditional Ostara vibe. For me, that definitely looks like doing my tablescape and my altar, as well as redecorating my sabbat trees. And I would love to know in the comments, how do you make your home have that spring energy for you? Do you go all out with decorating? Do you decorate in a subtle way? Or do you just really make everything clean and fresh for that spring season? Let me know in the comments. I know for some people it's just bringing out a spring candle. For me personally, I don't really burn a lot of candles in the height of summer because it gets very hot here. Like, it gets just as hot as it gets cold here in the winter versus the summer, but I do really like to make sure that I'm enjoying using candles in the early springtime before it gets too hot. So I sometimes like to do that by purchasing or making some kind of really beautiful spring floral scented candle and consecrating that with the magical intention and having it burning as I am going about my life during this season. And that is our next tip, which I promised you guys earlier. So if you're a candle junkie or a pyro like me, you are gonna love this next tip. So my next tip is to do some kind of fire or candle magic to welcome in the spring. And fire is, of course, the element of transformation, transmutation, change, passion, all of those things that kind of get you riled up and excited to create something new in your life and possibly to burn away the old that's no longer serving you. This can literally be anything depending on your situation and how crazy you want to get with it. Personally, there have been times in my life where I have had a large yard and I could have a big crazy bonfire. And then there have also been times when I've lived in a small apartment where I wasn't able to do anything even similar to that. And the closest I could get to it was to just have a nice spring scented candle. Currently, I'm in a situation where I can't have a bonfire, regrettably, but I do have a space outside where if I need to burn something on the quick, I can get away with it if no one is watching. And so the spell that I'm going to be doing this year is using this beautiful candle that I made during the Imbolc season for the springtime. If you don't know, Imbolc / February's Eve is the middle point between the winter solstice and the spring equinox, and it's often celebrated by pagans as a time of making candles and use them in the spring season. This particular candle has a nice fresh floral scent to it. It's a sort of combination of some lavender and some vanilla, and I've also included herbs and crystals in it that correspond to this refreshing, renewing type of energy. It's almost sort of like an air element inspired candle because, like I said, this time of year for me is the time when I get that air flowing again. But it is also fire magic because obviously it's a candle, and because it's me and my moon is in Aries and I am a little bit of a pyro, and this time of year is really, really good for that sort of rebirth energy and that energy of transformation, I do like to also turn this into a burn ceremony. So I will light my candle and then I will do some journaling on what I am bringing into my life and what I'm releasing from my life. Then I'll actually sneak out onto my patio with my cauldron and I will ritualistically burn that piece of paper, preferably using the flame of the spring spell candle. That just ties everything together in a really magical way for me. Aries helps you to kickstart your energy for the rest of the year. If you're able to do this, I highly recommend it, and better yet, if you can actually use a bonfire, good for you. I am jealous of you. But if you can't do an actual burn ceremony, you can also do a more fire-safe version of this spell where you journal with your candle lit as part of your ritual, and then you just fold your paper up and stick it into the soil or a plant pot or something like that. Even though the earth element is not as dramatic in its transformation effects as fire or as quick necessarily, it still has that same power of transformation just like every element does. And it does go along with this theme of stepping more into the garden vibes for this time of year. You can also throw it into a body of water on a nature walk. That is also just as good. If you saw my video in the fall with my friend Tanae Stewart, the Witch of Lupin Hollow, we talked a little bit about personal seasons and how the placement of your rising sign in your birth chart can help you to determine what your personal seasons are. So for me, my seasons are similar to the regular seasons, but they're slightly delayed. So for me, spring really starts kind of more at Beltane/May's Eve due to my personal astrology, as well as just the climate that I live in. So the spring equinox for me is not like full-blown spring vibes. It's more of an invitation to start stepping into spring and to start really taking action on whatever my resolutions are if I haven't already. It's an opportunity to start coming out of hibernation. And so that Aries energy really kind of helps to wake you up and sort of get that process started. Greetings, magical mavens, and welcome to this late spring bucket list for Beltane season/May's Eve season. So if you're new around here on this channel, I really like to take a look at the Wheel of the Year sabbats from the perspective of seeing them as 6-week seasons as opposed to just one day on the calendar every 6 weeks. This gives us the freedom to see the whole year as magical and not just specific days. And it also gives us the freedom to not feel forced to try and get all of the magical things done on that one day or that one weekend or even that one week. This way we have the entire season of 6 weeks to really incorporate the themes of the season into our everyday lives and also step into a more magical version of ourselves using those themes. So in the first video in this series from last month, we focused on the energy of the 6 weeks surrounding the spring equinox, which was on March 21st. And now that I'm thinking about it, I'm realizing that I didn't even mention in that video what exactly the spring equinox actually is. As a seasoned witch, pun intended, I guess I subconsciously assumed most folks would already have at least some idea of what the spring equinox is, since it's common knowledge that there are 2 equinoxes and 2 solstices every year. But the witch's sabbat that takes place later in the spring isn't quite as straightforward to those who are new to the Wheel of the Year. The seasonal checkpoint that lands around May 1st, also known as Beltane, May Day, Walpurgis Night, or Witch's Night, is actually what's known as a cross-quarter sabbat, the halfway mark between the spring equinox and the summer solstice. So if you're new to the world of witchy seasonal living, there are a few extra sub-seasons within the pagan calendar beyond just the mainstream 4 seasons. Between each solstice and equinox is a halfway mark that represents the height of the season, whereas the solstices and the equinoxes mark the beginning of the season. May's Eve is a celebration of abundant fertility. Spring is in full swing, giving way to summer. The blossoms are blooming, and love is in the air. This is a time to honor nature in the height of its potency, to acknowledge the life force energy of plants, animals, and human creativity. To use a simple gardening reference, you can think of the spring equinox as the time to start seedlings indoors, and then you can think of May's Eve as the time where you have thriving seedlings and they're just about ready to be planted out into the garden. So being the writing witch, tip number 1 is of course to do your seasonal journaling. For every one of the 8 witchy seasons, there are 3 themes that I like to focus on for each of the 8 seasons on the witch's calendar. The 3 themes that I like to focus on most this time of year are fertility, connection, and the Hermetic principle, aka universal law, known as the law of gender. For a much deeper dive into these themes and how we can incorporate them into both magical and mundane aspects of our lives this season to experience more joy and fulfillment, I invite you to check out the video video I did last year, which will pop up at the end of this video. And of course, you're also invited to join me and my witchy community of magical mavens over on Patreon, where we're doing our late spring seasonal living challenge, which is a perfect opportunity for both newbies and seasoned witches to reflect on what the seasons mean to us and to support each other in embodying these themes in whichever ways are most empowering for each of us as individuals. Your membership will also include access to these lovely information sheets and grimoire prompt pages that I've designed for the season. The next tip is to do some fire or candle magic. So unlike the solstices and equinoxes, which are celebrated by literally all of our pagan ancestors across the world, what we witches call the cross-quarter celebrations are actually the ones that came from the Wicca religion, which was inspired by traditions of Celtic and Northern European paganism. They're known to practitioners as the Celtic fire festivals. While you don't need to consider yourself a Wiccan or a Celtic pagan in order to add the cross-quarter holidays to your spiritual year, it can be fun to draw inspiration from those cultures for your traditions if you're looking for ideas on how to celebrate. So as a fire festival, the season of Beltane can be a great time to play with fire. Safely, of course. It's said that at the ancient Beltane celebrations, bonfires were lit and much merrymaking and ritual was partaken in around the bell fire. In my climate, I tend to think of late April into early May as the perfect time to start gathering outdoors again, especially around a fire if possible. It's just that time of year when it's finally warm enough again to spend the whole day outdoors and then light a fire as the sun sets to extend that warmth, companionship, and comfort into the cool night. Whether or not you're able to have or attend an actual fire, you can think of this season as a symbolic bellfire gathering, representing a time to temporarily abandon your usual routine to be playful and spontaneous in nature and good company. A time to shake off any lingering antisocial coping mechanisms that you may have picked up during your winter hibernation, and remember to connect with others and with nature during this time to be alive. For me, the energy of this season almost reminds me of a time years ago when my friend saved up her fitness points from her work program over winter to get an inflatable boat, and as soon as it was warm enough, a group of us brought it out to a local creek, where we not only reconnected with friends we might not have seen as much over winter, but also ended up getting invited by some totally random friendly people to have a drink and chat by the fire they had built on the shore. And I'm not gonna lie, I did feel a little bit uncomfortable at first because your girl is not normally one to talk to strange men, but I realized that these two guys who seemed totally different from one another had been strangers before meeting there that day, and their kindness to one another and to us inspired me to get out of my comfort zone a little bit. Granted, I was with a group of people that I trusted, and I always recommend using your intuition and practicing safety when it comes to strangers, but it was a prime example of that connection energy that's such an important part of the wisdom of this season. And of course, it's also still a great time to practice fire magic and candle magic in your rituals. I talked a lot about that in the spring equinox video, and I shared with you a tutorial for a burn ceremony, and it isn't too late to do any of the things mentioned in the early spring bucket list video. So if you haven't caught it already, I invite you to go back and check that one out after this video if you're looking for more magical things to do this spring. The next tip is to do a nature walk or just watch for wildlife. Now, I know some of y'all in warmer climates, or dog people, or anyone who isn't too sensitive to temperatures may have already been doing this, but for those of us who have been hibernating, there are no longer any excuses to keep us from getting out there in nature. In addition to getting out into the garden, this is also the time of year for me when I typically get in my first good hiking or forest bathing trip. I would absolutely love to live closer to a wooded area or body of water. Better yet, both. But since I don't get that consistent access to nature that I'm craving at this phase in my life, late spring is the time, if I haven't managed to already, to really plan an outdoor escape with the elements. And even on days when that isn't readily accessible, this is always the time when I start opening up my windows to allow the bird sounds in. And I find myself watching birds as they go about their daily doings, even as I work. I make sure that my desk is positioned in a way that I can see out the window so that even as I'm getting stuff done throughout the day, I still get to feel that connection to nature by observing what wildlife is able to be observed in the sort of industrial environment in which I live, which is mostly birds. If it's accessible to you in your living arrangement, I love this time of year for setting up a bird feeder somewhere where you'll be able to see it during the day. So whether you're able to invite nature closer to you, or if you need to commute to nature when you can, or some of both, getting fresh air and a tactile experience of the elements is so rejuvenating and inspiring now that the weather is warming up. The next tip is, of course, to decorate your altar or decorate your whole home in some way. If you've seen any of my videos, you know that decorating is one of the biggest ways that I personally like to celebrate the seasons. I like to go all out with an altar setup, an elaborate tablescape, and these 2 Sabbath-themed Christmas trees that I update every 6 weeks. But if you're in the broom closet or you just don't have the time or desire to decorate your whole house, even doing something as simple as putting out a different wreath or candle, or getting a seasonal bouquet of flowers is enough to give you that psychological trigger that the season has changed, and it's something to rejoice in and to savor for the short time that this chapter in your life is here. It's a way of romanticizing your life and celebrating where you are on the journey. So the next tip is to eat berries or to have teas that are made from fruit and flowers, or even try making some May wine. So May wine is a European May Day tradition which historically included white wine, strawberries, and an herb called sweet woodruff. I've never actually gotten my hands on sweet woodruff before, not that I've honestly really looked that hard for it. So even though I would love to try it in the traditional way sometime, I find that it's just as well to make up your own quote-unquote May wine concoction, using whatever is readily available to you that makes you feel connected to the season. Where I live, garden strawberries and even wild strawberries aren't necessarily even in season just yet anyway, so I figure why not just use whatever similar ingredients you happen to have in the fridge, or better yet, that actually are in season where you live. I've also heard of a wine you may be able to find at the store that's actually called May wine. If you tried that, let me know what you think of it. And if you're not into alcohol, your version of a celebratory May's Eve drink can just be a fruitade or iced tea, using the fruits and herbs of your choosing. Because May's Eve is traditionally known as a romantic season, I love to infuse my wines and iced teas this time of year with rose, for example. The next tip is to watch a movie that brings up the themes of this season for you. And actually, believe it or not, my favorite movie for this time of year is actually The Craft. Now, I know most people list The Craft as one of their favorite Halloween movies, but it actually takes place during the opposite season to Halloween, which is, of course, May's Eve. May's Eve is actually opposite on the wheel of the year from what I like to call November's Eve, also known as Halloween or Samhain, representing the springing forth of life as opposed to the onset of death. Naturally, a lot of the traditions of the dark time of year are about being deeply insightful and contemplating the meaning of life and death, and clinging tightly to that which keeps us safe and warm when the sun is at its weakest. But now that we've crossed over into the light half of the year, our spirits are lifted, and there's an overall feeling of a weight being lifted off of our shoulders. We've had our time to be deep and contemplative, and we're just about ready to throw caution to the wind and have some kind of a coming out party. So even though they live in California and they probably could have done this during the winter, I love that in the craft their big spell that they do out in nature is done on May's Eve, because it really makes sense. It's a good time of year for it weather-wise, almost wherever you live, because if you live somewhere where it gets really hot, it probably hasn't gotten too hot yet, and if you live somewhere where it's really cold, it's starting to really warm up. But also energetically, if you're going to do a big spell, especially with a group of people, it is the perfect time to do that outdoors. So even though I have never actually done a big ritual on the beach or in nature actually with a group of people, I love to watch this movie just for a little bit of inspiration. The next tip is simply to open all the windows. Now, I know I mentioned opening the windows in my bucket list for the spring equinox season, but again, if you're like me and you live in a cold climate, chances are last time you only opened the windows part of the way and left them open for a short amount of time, whereas this season, it's a lot more likely that you're going to be able to open all of the windows indoors and really let that fresh air in, and maybe just leave it like that for the whole day. It is so refreshing and just so satisfying. The next tip is beauty rituals or glamour spells. One of the traditions we hear about Beltane is this romantic idea that on May Day, maidens would go out into a natural body of water and bathe nude to renew their beauty and attraction power, or that they would literally bathe themselves in morning dew, which I imagine would involve like rolling around naked in the grass first thing in the morning. I don't know, but whether or not this actually happened or whether or not you're actually able to do anything like this yourself, I like to think of this season as a lovely time to do some kind of beauty, love, self-love, or bathing ritual. This can be as simple as taking a nourishing bath and doing a facial or skincare ritual with self-loving intention. Or it can get as close as you can to bathing in the morning dew if you want to. If you're simply able to go for a swim outdoors this time of year, that can be your ritual if you bring intention to it. In my climate, I'm certainly not going for any cold outdoor swims just yet in early May, but I'd love to someday have a private walled garden with a bathtub in it, or a bathtub in a greenhouse where I can live out my nature goddess dreams any time of the year. But my current tradition is to keep an eye on the weather the week of May's Eve and see if I can collect some rainwater. I use some of the water as part of my bath potion that week, and I save some of it for another time when I would like to reconnect with this magical energy of rebirth in any of my other spells or rituals throughout the year. Another thing you could do would be to collect water from a natural body of water on this day. Personally, I don't really do it that way because when I was in college, my friends and I used to like to go swimming in this little creek near our dorm building, and one day when we were having a grand old time, I looked across the water and saw that my friend was staring at her arm in a weird way. So then I looked down at my arm and I realized that there were tiny little gross bugs all over us. So we ran home and showered. And ever since then, I've been a little bit weird about putting my whole body in natural bodies of water. I don't know. I wish that this was not a problem, but I can't unsee what I saw. So for rituals where I'm actually going to be bathing in it, I like to use rainwater because I feel like it's a little bit cleaner, hopefully. But you do you. The next tip is to have a romantic date or plan some kind of get-together with your friends, preferably outside. Since romance is such an overarching theme of the season, it's a great time to be a little extra romantic, whether that be in a quote-unquote romantic relationship or in a more platonic sense. Beltane can kind of be thought of as a sort of pagan Valentine's Day. So if you're single, you can buy yourself flowers or have something like a Galentine's date with friends. Whether it's a fancy afternoon tea, a garden party, or just drinks and treats outside on the patio of a restaurant or your home, it's just a time of celebrating beauty and togetherness and sensuous experiences, even if that's just good food and good company. And the next tip is to embrace some kind of eco-friendly lifestyle upgrade, whether it's just something small or some kind of really big change. As the earth is waking up, it's also time for us to be a little bit more woke, so to say, in our relationship with her. It's a great time to establish new habits that are more environmentally conscious or to upgrade what we're already doing so that it's even more protective of our planet. You can even make a tradition of donating to a nature-based charity as an annual contribution this time of year. I actually already donate $5 a month to quite a few different organizations that support animals and sustainability. So this year I'm going to be focusing more on growing hopefully more of my own food and eating seasonally, as well as continuing to learn and share what I learn about composting. I invite you to come and sit for a spell. The summer breeze has a story to tell. About a time at the end of June, when the crickets hum a bewitching tune. The summer solstice is on its way, the shortest night and the longest day. A time for tea or wine outdoors, on shady porches or sandy shores, for candlelit dinners in the open air, and humid breezes frizzing up your hair. The magic of the moment comes when birds sing and crickets hum. The magic is in everything, and the simple moments life will bring. The sun patch that delights the cat, your favorite sundress or old straw hat. The magic is in the patch of daisies, and having permission to just be lazy. The solstice is a time of rest, when Earth is offering up her best. When desired feelings become habitual, that's the strongest but simplest ritual. Now's the time to relax and receive, and trust that's all you need to achieve. The elements are calling your name, so join them for this little game. Take pleasure in the simple things and see what magic summer brings. Greetings, magical mavens, and welcome to this Litha/summer solstice bucket list. So if you're new around here on this channel, I like to look at the wheel of the year not as 8 individual holidays, but as 8 seasons that are each 6 weeks long. This liberates us from this concept that we have to do all the magical things on one day, or even just one weekend or 1 week. And it also gives us permission to make our whole lives every single day feel magical by tapping into and embracing the themes of each season in our everyday lives. The summer solstice, aka Litha or midsummer, is the longest day and the shortest night of the year. Celebrated around June 21st, the summer solstice marks the end of the spring and the beginning of the summer season. It's called midsummer because astronomically, it's the middle point of the half of the year when the days are longer than the nights. Interestingly though, even though the sun is out for the longest amount of time this week, in many parts of the Northern Hemisphere, including here in New York, the weather is only just starting to feel like true summer. The days will begin to grow shorter after this checkpoint. Therefore, it has the vibe of a high energy celebration while also having a bittersweet undertone. It's a time to relax and be very present in the moment and to give oneself permission to relax. The energy of nature is nearing its peak of life force energy before the heat starts to dry everything out. For many of us, the weather is at its most comfortable this time of year. Not too hot or too cold. It's time to cherish the moment and relax into the nurturing energy of nature, to simply be. So, being the writing witch, of course, tip number 1 is to do your seasonal journaling. I have 3 favorite themes that I like to focus on for each of the 8 sabbats, and I always do some journaling around those subjects to help me tap into those themes and embody them and really step into my next level version of myself by working with the energies that are naturally going on in the season at hand. The 3 themes I like to focus on most this time of year are the present moment, the inner child, and something I like to call tween times. So I'm gonna just be a little bit mysterious and not explain at all what any of those things mean, and just promise you that it is really interesting and worth a watch after this video. So for a much deeper dive on these themes and how to incorporate them into both the magical and the mundane aspects of your life this season to experience more joy and fulfillment, I invite you to check out the video I did last year, which will pop up on your screen at the end of this video. And of course, you're also invited to join me and my witchy community of magical mavens over on Patreon, where we're currently doing our early summer seasonal living challenge to support each other in embodying these themes in whatever ways are most empowering for each of us as individuals. Your membership, of course, also includes access to my lovely information sheets and journal prompt pages that I've designed for the season. The next tip is to pick some wildflowers or get some potted flowers. Now, I know this is one of those seemingly generic traditions that literally everyone and their mom has mentioned in their How to Celebrate Litha videos and blog posts, but it's like that for a reason. Unless you're someone who buys yourself fresh bouquets or receives them from someone in your life all the time, or someone who picks wildflowers frequently for a work project while on walks with their dog, like my sister does, chances are you don't get to experience the fleeting magic of fresh flowers very often. Even those of us who garden or keep houseplants know that most flowering plants aren't in bloom most of the time, and we must soak up their beauty for the short time that they are. This ties into the journal prompt in our seasonal living challenge on Patreon about the magic of the moment. One of the biggest themes of the summer solstice is that it's a transient moment between the sun's waxing phase and its waning phase. Even though it's easy to look ahead at the remaining warm days and forget that summer doesn't last forever, this Sabbat is here to remind us that the days are actually about to start growing shorter and shorter again, which happens on the summer solstice or on the 22nd of June. In the practice of mindfulness meditation, it's often recommended to make a ritual of staring at a fresh flower, contemplating or simply appreciating its temporary beauty, knowing that everything in nature, including us, has its inevitable phases. It reminds us that all we ever really have is the present moment, and it's up to us to slow down and receive the gift of the present moment. This tradition has looked different for me each year, and it's created a chain of memories that allows me to reflect on the various stages of my own life thus far, appreciating each one for what it's been, even with what I perceived as imperfections at the time. When I was a teenager, I used to live in walking distance of a little park filled with wooded walking trails with a clearing in the middle atop a steep grassy hill. And on this hill, lots of beautiful wildflowers grew. And when I moved back to that neighborhood briefly in my 20s, I noticed that the summer solstice was the time when that hill was most covered with wildflowers. So I gathered some and placed them on my altar, and a tradition was born. In the past few years, however, I haven't lived near to a wooded or wild area, and I've really missed that. So now it's even more precious to me when I get to visit those more natural areas, and I sometimes make an extra special trip just to make sure I get to pick wildflowers somewhere this time of year. And inevitably, I know that someday I'll have a house and a yard that's full of wildflowers, and it'll seem absolutely normal to me to be surrounded by them. But even then, I'll have that deeply rooted appreciation for that experience, having cultivated this value even when it wasn't as accessible. I also have a lovely memory involving summer wildflowers from a time just a few years ago when I had gotten this idea in my head that I wanted to try manifesting this specific thing, receiving flowers from my partner. And as it often goes with those of us who are non-specific manifestors via our human design, it did not end up happening. No shade to my partner, he actually gifted me with lots of beautiful things during that time that were technically above and beyond flowers, but he just didn't get the hint about the flowers for some reason, probably because I was learning a lesson about manifestation there. Anyway, one of my favorite girlfriends ended up visiting me, and she happened to be a smoker at the time. And since cigarettes are not allowed on the patios here, we walked across the street to what's now another apartment complex, but at the time was a lovely vacant field that happened to be full of wildflowers that day. My friend picked a handful of them while we chatted, and I figured she was planning to take them home, but to my surprise, when we got back to my apartment, she put them in water and said they were for me. And this ended up being just one of many signs I received involving flowers, all of which seemed to be pointing me toward the concept of valuing my female friendships just as much as any romantic relationship. And just as with all things of this notion of valuing the present moment, it turned out that that vacant lot would be gone the following year. as would the habit of getting to hang out with that friend all the time and just do nothing in the middle of a random day, because she ended up getting married and giving birth to twins. And while I had appreciated that vacant lot in passing when it happened to be in bloom, I had kind of taken it for granted and hadn't even really thought to go and look closely to see what kind of wildflowers were in there until my friend happened to steer me over there that day. And now that there are no more open green spaces to be seen out my window, it's just yet another reminder to stop and smell the roses whenever we can. The next tip is to make a flower crown of some kind. This one is made out of fake stuff, but you could make it out of real ones and just have it be one of those magic of the moment things where part of the beauty of it is that it won't last forever. Or if you want it to last a lot longer and you do want to use natural materials, you can use dried flowers. So I did make a video years and years ago on how to make one of these using Dollar Tree items, but that was way before I really knew how to make a great YouTube video. So if you would be interested in an updated tutorial, I invite you to leave a comment letting me know, and maybe we'll be able to fit it in later this season or in one of the seasons ahead, because I actually have a seasonal headband that I've made for all 4 seasons. Stay tuned for the rest of the videos in this series where you will observe me wearing them. The next tip is, of course, to decorate an altar or decorate your entire space. If you've seen any of my videos, you know that decorating is one of the biggest ways that I personally like to celebrate the seasons. Personally, I like to go all out with an altar setup, an elaborate tablescape, and these 2 Sabbat-themed Christmas trees that I update every 6 weeks. But if you're in the broom closet or just don't have the time or desire to decorate your whole space, even doing something as simple as putting out a different wreath on the door or getting a seasonal bouquet of flowers like we talked about is enough to give you the psychological trigger that the season has changed, and it's something to rejoice in and savor for the short time that this chapter of your life is here. It's a way of romanticizing your life and celebrating where you are in the journey of life in a playful and beautiful way. And of course, if you enjoy getting crafty, you can always make your own seasonal wreath, either with fake or dried flowers to use year after year, or you can harness some of that magic of the moment energy that we talked about and use fresh flowers, herbs, and greenery to savor for the short time while it lasts. The next tip is to eat outdoors. I don't know about you, but for me, there is something so magical about enjoying a drink, snack, or full-on meal outside in the elements. For me, this personally dates back to the very, very beginning of my spiritual journey when I was recovering from depression and an eating disorder that I now know had stemmed from a feeling of being out of place in the universe. When I started prioritizing my physical, mental, emotional, and spiritual health, I quickly realized that being in quiet spaces outdoors as often as possible was one of the most accessible tools I had to help keep myself feeling at peace and connected to nature. Sometimes it looks like preparing a beautiful meal out of fresh fruits and vegetables and setting up a lovely outdoor picnic for myself in my yard, or packing a meal to eat on a hiking trip with a loved one. Other times, it just looked like hiding in the tiny green patch behind where I worked at the time to have a quick lunch in the sunshine between whatever madness was going on at work. Whatever it looks like for you, I invite you to have something to eat or drink outside and see how it makes you feel. This is something I'm challenging myself to do more too, because I originally got this apartment with the intention of spending a lot more of my meal breaks out on the patio. And even though thankfully I no longer have an eating disorder and I have a really great relationship with food now, which I must say is due in huge part to working with the Wheel of the Year, doing my seasonal journal prompts that are now part of the Seasonal Living Challenge, and understanding the plant tend harvest compost cycle that I fit into as part of nature, I still am very just energetically sensitive, especially to pollution and noise, as I'm really realizing. And so in order for me to eat comfortably, I kind of need to create a little bit of a safe space for myself. And what I hadn't realized until I moved into this apartment is just how loud and obnoxious the traffic would be. And especially now that there are even more noisy neighbors crammed into this area than there were when I first moved in, I've admittedly had a hard time feeling tranquil in what was supposed to be my little garden sanctuary. But just as we've been talking about throughout this video, I recognize the importance of accepting and appreciating the present moment despite its imperfections. So I'm choosing to lean into my magical tools. like my noise-canceling headphones. Yup, I'm an air sign, and I recognize that technology is also magic. So I'm using both magical and mundane tools to curate my day-to-day experience with things like recorded nature sounds and filling my porch with as many plants and magical objects as possible, using my witchy ingenuity to create my desired reality with whatever form the elements are currently taking in my life. The next tip is to do some kind of garden update documentation, or simply documenting what the nature around your home looks like this time of the year. As a gardening enthusiast, I like to take a picture and video of what my garden is looking like at each of the 8 seasonal checkpoints on the wheel of the year. And this year, my goal is to get even better with my documentation as a gardener and actually do some more in-depth journaling about what I've learned up until that point, how my plants are doing, and things that will help me become a better gardener going forward and to develop more green witch traditions. But even if you don't have a garden, it's still a great practice to just take note of what nature is doing in your environment and making a little tradition or ritual out of commemorating it in some way. This can, again, look like picking wildflowers and photographing them for your Instagram, or pressing them to later frame or use in your grimoire, journal, or book of shadows. You can actually journal about what nature looks and feels like right now, maybe even in the form of poetry. That's exactly how I created the poem that you heard at the beginning of this video, which you can also grab as a printable download on my shop. You can draw something that inspires you about your environment. You can use the local gifts of nature on your altar or in your spells and rituals. It's also a great time of year to make an altar outdoors if you can. This can be a semi-permanent altar that's in your own garden, or it can just be a temporary mandala made from the foliage you find in the woods that you leave out in nature as an offering to maybe any spirits that you work with, or just as a fun thing for other hikers to find. One thing I did years ago was collect little bits and bobs from nature during each of the seasons and put them each in their own jars. Then I could return to the contents of those jars 6 months later at the opposite Sabbat to ritualistically balance my energy by calling back on the magic of the opposite season. The possibilities are endless. My favorite movie to watch this time of year is Practical Magic. And again, just like I said in the last video on May's Eve when I mentioned the movie The Craft, this is another one of those movies that most people say is one of their favorite Halloween movies. And this one makes a little bit more sense for Halloween since there is a Halloween scene at the very end of the movie. But actually the majority of the movie takes place around the summer solstice. And you'll recall that when all the craziness goes down, the aunts and the little girls are at a summer solstice festival. It makes me think of things like potted rosemary by the front door, taking walks at the waterfront, tending to the garden, wearing flowy maxi skirts and spaghetti strap tops and straw hats with the wind in my hair. It was around the summer solstice last year that I got inspired to paint this plaque with the quote from Practical Magic that says, "Keep rosemary by your garden gate, plant lavender for luck, and fall in love whenever you can." I even learned how to age and whitewash wood to create this plaque, inspired by how they painted the entire little town white in order to film that movie. Now, this is more of a weird one, but if you are looking for a more obscure summer solstice movie, there's also The Love Witch. It's a really bizarre horror film about an emotionally insecure witch who does poorly planned love spells on unsuspecting men. And while I'm not normally much of a horror person, especially the ones that are about witches because I feel like it gives us a bad name, I actually love the whole aesthetic of this movie. From the 60s style visuals and music, to the old school Wiccan-inspired rituals, to the Baroque and Elizabethan songs used in some of the more artsy scenes in the film. It's hard to describe unless you just see it for yourself, so I will try to leave a link below of where you can stream this movie if you're curious. But my favorite part is the Summer Solstice Festival, which now has me adding Elizabethan ballads to my Summer Solstice playlist. It fits perfectly with one of my favorite midsummer traditions, which is seeing Shakespeare in the park. In my city, the first performance is always on the summer solstice, and it's a time to congregate on a grassy hill with a wooded area and a lake behind the set, having cheese and fruit and wine, and watching a great classic play as the sun sets. It's a perfect, timeless, secular way of celebrating midsummer out in the open, in a historical way. And it's even more perfect when they happen to be performing A Midsummer Night's Dream. And of course, whether or not you're able to see a live performance, this is also the perfect time to find a recorded performance or a film adaptation of A Midsummer Night's Dream, which I always think of as one of Shakespeare's most pagan plays. And I know a lot of people also like some movie called Midsummer that is also a recent horror movie from a few years ago. I have not seen it, and I kind of don't want to see it because, funny story, when I was doing keyword research for last year's Midsummer video, my partner walked in and was like, "Whoa, why are you looking up Midsummer? That is a terrifying movie that you would absolutely hate." And I told him I had heard of it, but again, had no interest in watching it, and I kind of had to explain to him that midsummer is another word that we pagans use to describe the summer solstice, and it's kind of weird and bizarre and a little bit annoying to me that a lot of the times when people first hear some of the terms and concepts of paganism, it is in the form of horror movies. But if you guys like that movie, no shade whatsoever. I'm actually thinking about it and I'm realizing that a lot of my favorite witchy movies are technically horror movies, even though I don't see them as scary. So like The Love Witch, not scary at all, but it's a horror movie. Even Practical Magic and The Craft are technically considered horror movies, even though they're not scary, at least not to me. But what do you guys think? Let me know what you think of pagan horror movies and what your favorite witchy and pagan movies are, especially for this time of year, because I'm always looking for new ideas. The next tip is a fun one, and that is to make and or just drink some kind of summer wine or mead. So mead is a wine made from honey that's most known now as what was historically drank during this time of year in European cultures during the Viking times, for example. But it was also used all over the world, going much farther back into history. So many pagans like to drink or even make their own mead during the seasons when honey is being produced by the bees in nature, as a way to connect to our pagan ancestors and to nature in general. Honey and bees and wine were all considered sacred throughout history in many cultures, and mead is a celebration of the abundance of the earth and sun and plants and animals and humans alike, since all of those interconnected things go into making this fascinating drink. I think I had tried mead for the first time many years ago when my college boyfriend bought some, but I actually hadn't had it again until last midsummer. I had learned about it in some of my witchy seasonal studies, and I wanted to remember how it tasted and see if it was something I might want to incorporate into my traditions. And even though mead was quite prevalent in history, it's apparently nowhere near as popular now because there was literally only one brand of mead at the huge liquor store in my city. But luckily I was able to find it, and it was lovely. And yes, I do intend to make a tradition out of it. So in addition to purchasing it again, I'm also planning to learn how to make my own, hopefully using local honey. So I'll be sure to share that with you guys when I do. The next idea is to make a nature terrarium. So this is kind of a spin on the tip about documenting nature, but this is something that can actually have the potential to live on indefinitely rather than dying and drying up, like cut flowers, for example. This is something I started doing a few years ago after a really cold, snowy winter when I desperately missed the greenery of summertime. I thought if I could only just see and smell that damp, lively forest floor somehow, by saving a little piece of it in a bottle, that would help me feel more grounded and at peace when the world outside is frozen with no end in sight. So that summer, I learned how to make moss terrariums. It did take a bit of trial and error to see which kinds of plants and mosses would live well in a jar, and how to make sure it's getting the resources it needs, but it's actually pretty easy once you get into it. If you set it up correctly and put it in the right location, it will completely take care of itself with basically zero maintenance. In fact, the terrariums that I have right now have been living pretty much maintenance-free for years now. All you need to do is put some rocks on the floor of a clear glass jar and then layer a little bit of soil on top and place some moss inside. Water it a little bit, preferably with a spray bottle so that you don't overdo it, because this thing is really never going to need to be watered. I think I put a tiny splash of water in mine a couple of times a year, just because mine are not sealed tightly, and so I think a little bit of the water evaporates over time. But essentially, the water will create its own ecosystem, where it creates mist that goes to the roof, and then that sort of trickles back down, and then it goes into the soil, and the cycle repeats itself. It's really cool. There are some more specific methods that can supposedly help you prevent things like mildew and just make sure that it works a little bit better, including using things like mesh in between of the rocks and the soil and activated charcoal. So you can look that up online if you want to get really into it, but I have discovered that sometimes it works perfectly fine without those things. Mine includes a house plant that was drying out too much before I enclosed it into the jar, and even though it hasn't grown much over the years, it's clearly alive and well. One thing I had to learn is that the terrariums needed more light than I had originally thought. Even though the forest floor seems like a shady area, the moss down there actually gets a lot more light there than can easily be found in a seemingly bright corner of my home. So I had to keep mine either directly in the window or under a grow lamp. Since I wanted mine to be somewhere where I could easily see it every day, I put it on my headboard and screwed a good quality grow light bulb into the lamp directly above it. And yes, every once in a while I do stick my nose in there in the dead of winter, and it does smell just like the forest floor. You can even create rock formations or stick figurines in them to create a tranquil nature scene, or even use it as a mini shrine or altar. The next tip is to find a body of water to hang out at. The summer solstice is actually the official start of Cancer season on the zodiac wheel. Cancer is a water sign that deals with the more cozy, luxurious aspects of the water element. So along with things like watering the garden and decorating my home with a watery theme, one of my favorite ways to honor the water element this time of year is to spend time in or near water. There's something about being near a natural body of water that feels so energizing and magical to me. So I always make sure to get out to the waterfront when the weather is nice enough for it, and as I mentioned in the Beltane/Maze Eve video in this series, I'm not as much one for actually swimming in natural bodies of water, but if that's your thing, this is the perfect time to make that happen. As for me, I prefer walking near the water, or maybe just sticking my feet and my legs in, or being in a boat or kayak. And even though I unfortunately can't do this in my current living situation, I used to love taking a bath with fresh flowers in the water that maybe even I had picked, in a sunny bathroom during golden hour. Sadly, there are no windows in my bathroom here, but if you can be submerged in water with the sunlight on your naked body, I highly recommend it. I don't know why, but for some reason, it just makes me feel like a fairy or a goddess or a mermaid or something. It's great for bathing rituals or just for relaxing and soaking up the good vibes. August's Eve, also known as Lammas or Lunasa, is the midpoint between the summer solstice and the autumn equinox. Celebrated around August 1st, it's known to witches as the first harvest. This time of year, in the long, warm, hazy days of summer, it's easy for us to take it all for granted. But August's Eve sweeps in to remind us that summer does not last forever. The beginning of August is our reminder to pause and acknowledge the beginning of the end of summer. It certainly isn't autumn yet, but it's time to begin shifting our consciousness to make way for the more solemn days of fall and winter ahead. In agricultural times, the first harvest was a celebration, a time to enjoy the summer fruits and vegetables before shifting into the more work-heavy harvest season ahead. This is our time to rejoice in the abundance of summer, one last time before autumn sets in for good. Greetings, magical mavens, and welcome to this seasonal bucket list for the August Eve / Lammas / Lunasa season. So if you're new around here on this channel, I like to look at the Wheel of the Year not as 8 holidays that you have to celebrate just on those 8 specific days, but instead as breaking up the whole year into 8 seasons that are 6 weeks long. This liberates us from the idea that we have to do all of the magical things on one day or one weekend, or even just in the 1 week surrounding that Sabbath. And it also gives us permission to create magic in our everyday lives by embodying the themes of each season for a longer and more sustainable amount of time. So of course, being the writing witch, tip number 1 is always to do your seasonal journaling. I have 3 different favorite journal prompts that I like to use for each of the 8 seasons on the witch's calendar. My 3 favorite themes to focus on for this time of year are abundance, craftsmanship, and transition. But we're not going to go into any of that in this video because I made a whole video about it last year, and that video will pop up for you at the end of this video. In that video, I'm not only giving you my favorite journal prompts, but I'm also authentically sharing with you my own responses to those journal prompts for the 2022 season, where you'll actually get to see in action what it's like to apply these themes to your life in a mindfully witchy way. So stay tuned for that. And of course, if you want to dive really deep into that, I also invite you to grab the journal prompt pages that I've made for your grimoire or book of shadows. You can get these as printables that you can get instant access to. These are also the same prompts that we're focusing on in the Writing Witch community over on Patreon for our late summer seasonal living challenge, where we come together as magical mavens and talk about how these themes are showing up in our lives. So if you're interested in that, the link to that will be below as well. The next tip is, of course, to build an altar or decorate your whole house into a seasonal altar. If you've seen any of my videos, you know that decorating is one of the biggest ways that I personally like to celebrate the seasons. Personally, I like to go all out with an altar setup, an elaborate tablescape, and these 2 Sabbath-themed Christmas trees that I update every 6 weeks. But if you're in the broom closet or just don't have the time or desire to decorate your whole space, even doing something as simple as putting out a different wreath on the door or getting a seasonal bouquet of flowers like we talked about is enough to give you the psychological trigger that the season has changed, and it's something to rejoice in and savor for the short time that this chapter of your life is here. It's a way of romanticizing your life and celebrating where you are in the journey of life in a playful and beautiful way. And of course, if you enjoy getting crafty, you can always make your own seasonal wreath, either with fake or dried flowers to use year after year, or you can use fresh flowers, herbs, and greenery to savor for the short time while it lasts. And since this is harvest season, the next tip is to have some kind of a harvest feast or incorporate local foods into your diet. If you're gardening, this could mean picking whatever happens to be ready in your own garden, or it can just mean going to a farmer's market or going to your grocery store and looking for things that you know are actually in season in your area. This year, seasonal eating is something I'm learning more about and leaning more into as I go along. While I've incorporated certain aspects of seasonal eating into my practice ever since the beginning of my Wheel of the Year journey many years ago, I had never previously done an actual deep dive into the nitty-gritty details of all the foods that are and are not seasonal for each month of the year in my area. I used to tend to simply incorporate the obvious ones, like corn and wheat for this time of year, for example. But I was approaching it more so from a ritualistic/traditional standpoint of indulging in those foods that make me feel connected to the season in general this time of year. But as I'm getting more and more into gardening and shifting into a more eco-friendly lifestyle, I've discovered that there's a lot more to seasonal eating than just that. Of course, if you're just getting started with seasonal living in general, it's perfectly fine to start small like I did. Just go for those obvious foods from each season whenever possible, and don't focus too much on perfectionism. This will help you to gradually wrap your mind around the concept without getting overwhelmed or having to think too much about it if you're busy. Because if you overthink it, you're probably going to get frustrated and give up, and that kind of defeats the purpose. But if you are curious about more of the what and the how and the why of seasonal eating for health, economical, and ecological purposes, I highly recommend doing some additional research. Not only is seasonal eating a habit that helps us to feel more in tune with nature on a mental level, but it's also a great health benefit for ourselves and for our planet. I'm totally still learning about this, but in short, what I've learned so far is that our modern society has evolved to be able to import just about any kind of food from just about anywhere, just about any time, which is definitely a huge blessing in many regards. However, when we do this mindlessly without understanding the benefits and the drawbacks of imported food, it can be yet another factor contributing to our overall sense of disconnect from nature and our place within it. By familiarizing ourselves with what is and isn't naturally in season, we're able to make more conscious selections that can be better for us and be better for the environment. So the basic rule of thumb is that even with imported crops, there are things in the grocery store today that are in season where they came from, and things that were forced to grow outside of their natural season, whether that was close to home for you or far away. The things that are out of season are grown under highly manipulated conditions, which both leads to more energy waste and less nutrients and less flavor, believe it or not. This is something I've definitely noticed with gardening, especially tomatoes. I feel like tomatoes are one of those things where when you buy it out of season or imported or whatever, it's never anywhere near as flavorful as something that was grown nearby or that you grew yourself. And I think this is why. And to take things a step further down the rabbit hole, the other rule of thumb is that the farther away your food is imported from, the higher the negative impact on the environment due to fuel emissions, and the more likely it is that the food has been treated with preservatives or additional pesticides as they cross the borders of different countries. I learned this in a surprising way earlier in the spring when I was getting my garden started. I wanted to see if I could grow certain fruits and vegetables right from the seeds that come out of the fruit that I bought at the grocery store. And I learned that sometimes it works and sometimes it doesn't, and one of the main factors of why it doesn't work, if it is a type of plant that normally grows in your area, of course, is that it's actually been treated on its way from another country and the seeds are now no longer viable. Kind of weird, right? So if they're doing something that changes the viability of the seed, there's a high chance that it's probably less nutritional for us as well. And things that have already had to travel a long way to get to your grocery store also tend to have a shorter shelf life once they're there, leading to more potential food waste, either in your own fridge or at the grocery store or in transit, and less nutrients left within them. From the moment that a fruit or a vegetable is picked off of the plant, it immediately starts losing some of its vital nutrients. And the farther away it is, the longer that time is. While some folks get super into the nitty-gritty details of this and are really strict with themselves, I like to take a more approachable approach. So here are two of the simplest and most accessible methods that I've found so far. Number one is just to see if there's a farmer's market or a store that focuses mainly on in-season and sustainable options, and shop there. This also supports local farmers and companies that have sustainability as one of their top priorities, which is always a plus. And two, shop at your regular grocery store, but keep a running list of what's in season and buy that as much as possible. This can also be more economical for you because typically foods that are in season are grown closer to home and or with less need for crop manipulation, which means that you're paying less for them since they're in abundance. So you're paying less for better quality food when it's in season. One easy thing to do is just to check the label to see where it's grown. If it's grown in or relatively near your country, that's more ideal than if it's grown farther away. So if, like me, you live in an area where the climate isn't hospitable to some of your favorite fruit, that doesn't mean that you can never eat them again. Just learn when it's in season where it does come from and try to purchase it from as nearby as possible when it is. So for example, sometimes I'll go to the store and I'll see fruit that has been grown in Mexico, and then I'll see fruit that's been grown in California. California is a little bit closer, and it's in my own country, so there's less of a likelihood that it's been zapped or treated with something as it was crossing the border. In this context, it may actually surprise you what's considered in season. For example, when I was learning about this back in the spring, I kept finding Pinterest infographics that were really cute and everything, but I wasn't sure if I could trust them because they said that lemons and grapefruit were in season, which sounded at first like someone was just trying to throw those things onto the list because those foods are things that we tend to want to eat during the spring, but couldn't possibly actually be in season, right? Wrong. I had assumed that in the warmer climates where citrus fruits actually grow, they must come to fruition in the fall, because that's what apple trees do here in New York, right? But as it turns out, since the climate is so different where those things grow, their season of fruition is actually totally different. And when I learned that, it came together for me in one of those full circle aha moments when I recalled that when I had visited California back in March of 2019, the Airbnb that I stayed at had ripe grapefruits growing on it in the yard, and we were harvesting them and making drinks out of it. And I guess I was just so disoriented because I had never been in that type of climate before, I just didn't even question it. But now I'm understanding that grapefruits were actually in season around the spring equinox. So I was going to give you a semi-comprehensive list of what's in season for July and August for inspiration, but I'm actually not gonna do that, and here's why. It's gonna be a very long list. When I first started this journey, it was spring, and the list of in-season foods for spring is actually pretty short. There are only a handful of things that are ready to harvest nearby, and the list of fruits that were in season, even imported, was relatively short too, even if it did include surprising things like citrus fruits. So during that season, I really leaned into those things that were on the list, some of which were stuff that I was already incorporating into my spring diet, knowingly or unknowingly, and then there were a few things that I decided to try that I hadn't been focused on previously. So that was really kind of fun for a spring deep dive. But for mid to late summer, it seems like almost everything is in season. While there are some things like spring onions and citrus, for example, that's now out of season, as well as things like winter squash that aren't ready just yet, the vast majority of fruits and vegetables are abundantly growing relatively nearby this time of year. It would almost be easier to find out what isn't in season and avoid those things, and instead use the method I described above, simply checking out the selection at a farmer's market or checking labels at the grocery store to see what's being cheaply grown in your country or as nearby to your country as possible. And I know this might not be a tip that works for everyone, but since I happen to live in a very large country that has almost every type of climate somewhere within it, if I am looking for a type of fruit or vegetable and I can't find it from within the US, that's probably a good rule of thumb to realize that it's probably just not in season and I should explore some other things to eat. And this can be a really fun way to try new recipes, try new things, and develop new traditions based on types of food. Some of us get really bored with just eating the same things all the time, or want some kind of initiative or incentive to try things on more of a seasonal basis, and this is a really fun and easy and healthy way to do that. And not only is it physically healthier and more economical and better for the environment, but I personally believe that as a pagan, it's also more spiritual. When we are putting into our bodies things that are grown more naturally within their natural season, it kind of just makes us feel like we're more part of nature, and it goes beyond just an emotional and mental thing. We see ourselves and experience ourselves more as part of that plant, tend, harvest, compost cycle, and things have more meaning. If we can just go into the grocery store and have absolutely anything at absolutely any time of the year with perceivably no consequences whatsoever, it kind of takes the fun and the meaning out of it in a way. Whereas if we learn to eat seasonally, it gives us something to look forward to and to get excited about. Think about pumpkin spice season, right? Are you somebody who likes pumpkin flavored everything when fall comes around? Personally, I'm one of those people, and that is one of the easiest examples. We look forward to that because we don't have it all the time. It's something exciting, something celebratory, and we can kind of feel that way about all of our foods when we learn to live seasonally. And on the flip side of that, it also kind of makes things a little bit simpler and easier. As with all things in my life and practice, I love that seasonal eating provides a sense of freedom within structure. When we have so much choice at the grocery store, grocery shopping or meal planning can become kind of overwhelming. But if we are consciously aware of what is and isn't in season, we can kind of base our meal planning around what's in season. This was especially helpful in the spring when I was first getting started, where there really were only a handful of things that were in season, and I was able to kind of plan my meals around those things, still using my usual comfort base foods like pasta and rice and quinoa and stuff like that. But for the produce that I would add, I was able to create fun meals that maybe I wouldn't have thought of another time of year, but I was also able to maybe perfect that recipe by working on it a few times during those couple of months, and then I can return to that again the following year. I'm someone that eats a lot of produce, and it also kind of allowed me to not feel like I was wasting food. Not that I'm someone who wastes food, because honestly, I compost almost everything. If anything goes bad in my fridge, I pretty much compost it. But I would actually get to eat the full quantity of what I had purchased, because instead of going to the produce section and grabbing a few of everything like I used to do, whether they were in season or not, and then realizing that, say, my peppers were going bad because I was trying to save them for later because the spinach needed to be eaten first and blah, 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 I was instead just able to grab just those things that were in season, and I knew what I would want to cook with them by getting ideas on Pinterest, and the whole process would just be a lot more simplified and a lot more minimalistic. But this process doesn't necessarily feel limiting because I know that the following month there's going to be more things in season that I can get excited about, and I can kind of start all over again. There are also both scientific studies as well as more personal observations and more of the spiritual realm of feeling more connected and more of a sense of belonging in the world when we're actually eating things that are in season or are relatively locally grown. On a scientific level, this can have to do with things like allergies. Have you heard that idea that if you eat local honey when it's in season, it'll kind of give you an immune shot to the kinds of flowering plants in your area that might have otherwise made you feel allergic? I think that same thing is kind of true for food in general. Mother Nature grows certain things at certain times because we need those types of vitamins or that type of detoxification quality or that type of weight and warmth for like the winter crops, for example, to keep us feeling good during the time of year and the conditions that we're dealing with. This is a huge rabbit hole, so if you want to know more about this, let me know in the comments, and as I'm continuing to do more research, I can share more of this with you guys. But for now, let's move on to the next topic. The next tip is to make corn dollies or any kind of seasonal craft using things that you can find in nature in your area or natural items in general. One of the names for the first harvest festival that many of us pagans celebrate is Lunasa, named for the Celtic god Lu, a sun god and a god of the harvest. One of his titles was Lum Fada, possibly being translated as artful hands, dealing with skill of craftsmanship. Julius Caesar regarded him as the Celtic version of Mercury, another version of the magician archetype, which is related to creativity and crafting the life we desire with the elements we have available. Whether or not you're interested in Celtic or deity-oriented aspects of the Wheel of the Year, this season is also just a natural time to lean into the themes of craftiness and creativity. Long before I ever knew about Lunasa or the pagan Wheel of the Year, I always naturally regarded this time of year as a time for playful creativity. It's a time when nature is abundant with gifts of flowers, foods, nuts, grasses, twigs, seed pods, corn husks, even seashells, bug parts, bleached animal bones, and all kinds of other fun things that we can use to make arts and crafts. It's also a great time for wild crafting in general and to do outdoor building projects. One fun and traditional craft that many people, both pagan and muggle alike, tend to do this time of year is making corn dollies and or corn husk dolls, which are two slightly different things, even though in the pagan community you might hear them used interchangeably. So corn dollies were made by ancient Europeans out of wheatgrass, and corn husk dolls were made by ancient Native Americans out of corn husks, each with their own mythologies associated with them. In more recent centuries, European Americans and African Americans have adopted this tradition as well, and now we can make them in the European style, the American style, or a mixture of both. In Europe, it was said that the corn dolly, with corn at the time meaning a more generalized term for edible grasses, since they did not have the American maize, which we now call corn, was created to represent a grain deity and was made out of the last sheaf of grain to be kept safe in the home over winter. It would then be sowed into the field the following year to represent the cycle of continuation to evoke another abundant harvest. In Native American culture, corn does refer to maize, which was one of the three sisters of Native American agriculture, along with beans and squashes. The legend says that she, Corn, wanted to create something new in the world, and so she crafted corn husk people with the intention of them bringing brotherhood and contentment to the people of the tribes. But one doll was made too beautiful and became vain, so her punishment was that her face was removed, which is why corn husk dolls are traditionally made without faces. Both stories are fascinating, but if you're like me and the mythology aspect is more so just for inspiration than for anything else, feel free to form your own tradition based on either or both of these stories, or just give it your own significance. Last year, my partner and I made corn husk dolls with some added wheat elements inspired by corn dollies. We enjoy mythology from an archetypal standpoint, but don't necessarily believe in it in a literal sense, so we just decided to use ours more so as poppets for a blessing spell. I made a doll to represent me, and he made a doll to represent him. And we each wrote a note of blessing for the other on pieces of paper, which we then exchanged and folded up to use as the stuffing for the chest of each other's doll. So my doll contains his blessing for me, and his doll contains my blessing for him. I've been keeping these dolls on my altar for the past year, and I haven't quite decided yet if I want to take inspiration from the corn dolly tradition and sacrifice these two to the elements after creating new ones with new blessings in them this year. I feel like that would be a really cool tradition to form, but these guys are also kind of growing on me, and perhaps I would like to keep them around until more of our wishes have manifested. What do you guys think? Have you guys ever used corn dollies in spell work? If so, I would love to know your tips or what you think about this, and I'll keep you guys posted on what I decide to do. Now, one little just practical tip for you guys. I saw some tutorials on how to make corn husk dolls using the pieces of corn husk that are actually sold in the store for the use of wrapping tamales and things like that. And I believe that way would have been so much easier, because what I decided to do, because it's me, I wanted to get my hands dirty and really mess around with stuff, I decided to just get actual fresh corn on the cob, to peel it, and to use the skin to make the dolls. And those corn husks are just a lot harder to work with. They're thinner and flimsier, and they obviously haven't been collected and like cleaned and ironed with the intention of it being used for crafting. So we kind of had a little bit of a hard time with it, and we did have to cheat a little bit and use some hot glue and things like that, which I am completely fine with. But if you want to make them in the traditional sense, or if you just aren't quite as crafty and want it to be as simple and straightforward as possible, I recommend looking up a simple tutorial and getting the kind that is marketed as corn husks. But if you want to be crazy and have some fun with it like me, feel free to peel your own corn and do it this way as well. The next tip is to do a little kitchen witchy prosperity spell in the form of a grain bottle. Now, this one, like most traditions, probably has some old world cultural origins and meanings associated with it, but if it does, I honestly don't know about it. For me, this was just one of those things that had personal significance because I recall doing this type of craft with my mom when she used to homeschool me and my siblings and some other children in our community back in the 90s. I had almost forgotten about it until I noticed a grain bottle on someone's kitchen altar or their llama/Lunasa altar on Pinterest, and I remembered how much I had enjoyed doing this as a child. But I think in the picture they had just used one type of grain, but then I remembered that you could layer things. Back in the day, my mom had showed us how to use just white rice for the whole project, staining it different colors using food coloring. We layered it together until we'd created some kind of striped or rainbow-like pattern. But last year, I decided to combine that memory with a little bit more of a witchy flair. For me, this was kind of an extension of the tradition I had already been dabbling in of keeping various types of grains in clear glass bottles in visible spots in my kitchen. I had read years ago that some pagans add these types of things to their kitchen witchery altars as representations of abundance. Since I currently have a tiny kitchen with no free counter space whatsoever for an altar, I've just kind of done what I do with my whole home. Let the space itself double as one big altar. I've been stashing dried edibles in glass containers as part of my utilitarian decorating scheme for a while, but last August's Eve season, I decided to take it a step further and put even more intention into it for this more symbolic talisman for abundance and prosperity. I simply selected a more decorative bottle and layered all the different types of grain I had on hand to create a striped pattern. I brought intention into it by chanting my home blessing mantra as I went. I used everything but the kitchen sink, so to say, to represent always having a wide range of choice. And I filled it all the way up to the top to signify an overflowing of abundance. Unlike my other bottles, which get filled up and used up periodically since they are simply just somewhat decorative ways of storing actual food that I use, this bottle is meant to remain unused as a permanent symbol of always having more than enough. Kind of like some people have that $1 or $5 bill or $20 bill or even $100 bill in their wallet that they kind of just keep in there as a talisman that they don't actually spend, just to represent always having enough. That's kind of like doing this for your kitchen. And it actually worked out perfectly because I had been hoarding this small gold leaf wine bottle for many years, waiting for something to use it for. I had originally intended to remove the writing off of the back of it and use it for liquid, but it was extremely difficult to erase, so I planned on using it for something opaque so that you couldn't see the back of it. And just when I had finally cleaned out my jar collection and was about to recycle it, I came up with this project idea. Can you relate? Are you a bottle hoarder too? If so, this might be a great way to use some of them up. The next tip is to sit outside at night. I know some of you guys live in climates where this is a seasonless activity, but for me, sitting outside at night is really only something I get to do during the warmest part of the summer. Other than those rare times when I intentionally bundle up and hopefully create a fire around the winter solstice, this is the only time I can comfortably enjoy the magic of the night. When I used to have a yard of my own, I used to love having a fire and doing ritual outside at night, or just sitting with loved ones telling stories. With my current lifestyle, it typically takes the form of intending to just sit outside reading, writing, or watching videos during the long sunset hour, and then ending up just not ever wanting to go inside. So I instead light a candle, take my dinner outside, or a drink, and just watch the moon and stars come out. The next tip is reading or journaling outside. Similar to the last tip, but in daylight, this can be done anywhere, anytime. Whether it's taking a book or your journal outside for your morning or evening ritual, or just heading outdoors for your lunch break, or even taking a special trip out into nature to get some serious reading or writing done, I find that this is sometimes exactly what I need to shift my energy to a more relaxed state during the day. Or it can even help me get motivated to really get a lot of reading or writing done, especially when I have something like a magazine article, a workbook page for my patrons, or even a YouTube script to write. Going outside into the elements gets rid of any writer's block brought on by being confined to four walls. A couple of years ago on the spring equinox, when my siblings and I went on a hike in Niagara Falls, not the touristy area, but the hiking trail area, I actually saw a girl on the trail who was sitting at the very top of a cliff with the river rushing underneath, and she seemed to be reading the Bible or something like that. And it kind of got me thinking that would be such a cool trip to do. It doesn't need to be the Bible, obviously. It could be your favorite witchy book. It could even be your favorite fictional book. Just something that makes you feel really connected to nature, and take it to some really cool place where you can sit outside and do your reading. It seems very magical to me, or I guess in her case, very spiritual. In fact, when I was a kid all the way into my teens, I would sometimes climb a tree and read a magical book in a tree. Now back then my magical books were fiction because I didn't know I was a witch yet, so I was probably reading like Aragon or the Chronicles of Narnia or something around those lines, maybe some Spiderwick Chronicles in there. But I had this awesome tree in my backyard that I had as a teenager, and I would climb to somewhere around the middle where I could really feel the wind and the elements, and I would just sit up there reading, and I would come down and there would be splinters in my pants and my hair would be all crazy. But it was just such a cool experience, and I would really like to do that again. And I especially encourage you to try doing your seasonal journal prompts outside whenever possible. If you're in my Patreon group doing our seasonal living challenge, or even if you've just purchased my Wheel of the Year prompt pages for your grimoire, it pairs really well with spending time outdoors. It opens up your mind to pondering curiosities in a more free-flowing way, and it's so much more expansive than just sitting at your desk. And the next tip is to either try your hand at baking bread, or maybe make something simple like a banana bread, or even just try making an herbal infused honey or butter to be served with bread. Going back to the theme of the grain harvest, another theme for this first harvest festival is cooking with grain and grain products. The Anglo-Saxon name for the festival was Lammas, meaning loaf mass, a celebration of carbs. Now, I know carbohydrates have a bad reputation nowadays with our modern dieting culture, but back in the days, carbs were celebrated as a gift from the earth. Before humans lived such sedentary lives where they felt the need to avoid eating carbs, carbs served as the fuel they needed to get through their days of manual labor and athletic ventures. It was a filling pantry item that had better lasting power than fresh vegetables and meats, and it was considered sacred in a way, a sort of synthesis of human ingenuity and the gifts of Mother Earth. Even after the Christianization of Europe, Lammas continued to be celebrated as a time to make bread and take it to the church to be blessed for abundance in the harvest season ahead. Partaking in your own version of this celebration can even be as simple as just making a pasta meal or eating popcorn with intention, if you're not feeling too adventurous in the kitchen. There are even gluten-free, keto, and vegan recipes out there for making bread, so feel free to use this invitation to try some kitchen witchery. This year, I intend to bake a few loaves of bread and get in the habit of making my own bread more consistently. I tried making bread for the first time a couple of years ago, and I had intentions to stick with it, but I didn't. Other than just being a general shameless carbitarian, the idea of baking bread has a special meaning for me now. It's the concept of carving out extra time for the domestic arts and learning traditional skills that I never really prioritized before when I identified as someone whose life was too busy for that sort of thing. Bread making can be quite a time-consuming task, with all the kneading and waiting for yeast to rise and making a floury mess of the whole kitchen in the meantime. And unlike most of my adventures in cooking, it can't really be done at the spur of the moment at 8:30 for a quick late dinner after working on all my other projects all day. It's a science, not just a lawless art form like the way I normally throw meals together intuitively. It takes patience and timing and the ability to follow traditional instructions, which are not areas that my brain is normally wired to focus on. By having the discipline to learn the art and science of bread making, I intend to devote this practice to my intention to learn to identify as someone who has the time and focus to create a more of a slow living lifestyle and a home that supports that. And since homemade bread not only has more love in it, but also tends to taste better than store-bought bread, it's a kitchen witchy goal of mine that I'm sure will pay off. The next tip is to start bringing some harvesty scents into your home. It isn't quite autumn yet, but this is the time of year when I like to get my first sort of harvest scented candle just to start bringing in some of that energy into my home. There's something about September that bids me to remember, to take a break from the daily grind, to see what beauty I may find. Now's the time to pause and breathe, to gaze upon the changing leaves. I see my first red leaf today. Tomorrow it will fade away. The autumn season doesn't last. It's here today, then gone so fast. The squirrels collecting nuts and seeds to stash away for winter needs. Chestnut, walnut, pine cone, acorn, pumpkin, apple, barley, sweet corn. The harvest time means gratitude, to have a thankful attitude. Merry meet and gather friends to celebrate as summer ends. The autumn equinox is near, a magical time on the wheel of the year. Waning day and waxing night, we bid farewell to the fading light. A time of balance and calibration, a time of feast and celebration. We gather together now to say we're thankful on this autumn day. Deck the halls with ears of corn, let new traditions now be born. Go pumpkin picking in the fields, rejoice in what the harvest yields. Pluck an apple from the bough, be present in the here and now. It's time to turn our gaze inside. Such intuition the fall provides. And as the days begin to cool, the time has come for back to school. A teacher now, yet forever a student. Life's a classroom, and learning is prudent. September plays a sacred song for those who care to hum along. The sun, our father, and the earth, our mother, are forever waltzing with one another. In the forest by the stream, reflections of the colors gleam. Tiptoe upon the forest floor and see what nature has in store. It's nature's time of slowing down as leaves are drifting to the ground. So slow it down, take a breath, remember life shall follow death. The leaves now falling on the earth become spring soil for seeds to birth. And so it is with everything, for life's a cycle, a circle, a ring. We reap what we sow and sow what we reap. The seeds which we plant are the crops we will keep. So walk your path upon this earth. Be grateful for your home and hearth. Merry part we'll meet as friends when the wheel of the year has turned again. Greetings, magical mavens, and welcome to this autumn equinox edition of our seasonal bucket list. So if you're new around here on this channel, I like to look at the wheel of the year not as 8 individual holidays that you have to celebrate on specific days of the year, but instead I just like to look at it as splitting up the year into 8 seasons that each last 6 weeks long. This liberates us from the concept that we have to try and cram all of our magical stuff into like one day or one weekend or 1 week that's closest to the Sabbath. And it gives us permission to make the entire season feel magical by incorporating the mindfulness themes of each Sabbath into our everyday lives for that season. The autumn equinox, aka Maban to some pagans, is also known as the first harvest on the wheel of the year, and in the northern hemisphere it's celebrated around September 21st. The word equinox means equal night, referring to the way there are 12 hours of daylight and 12 hours of darkness on both the autumn and spring equinoxes. At the autumn equinox, the long days are ending to make way for the darker, colder half of the year. On the autumn equinox, the hours of daylight and the hours of darkness are equal, about 12 hours of each. But after that day, the scale starts to tip and the days actually become shorter than the nights. So So of course, since this is the Writing Witch channel, tip number 1 is always to just do your seasonal journaling. For each of the 8 seasons, I have 3 different journal prompts that I like to do that take the themes of that season and help me to incorporate them into my everyday life in a way that actually helps me to step into the next level version of myself. My 3 favorite themes to focus on for the autumn equinox season are balance, gratitude, and preparation. We'll be touching on these themes in this episode, but for a much deeper dive into how to embrace them to experience more peace and fulfillment this season, I invite you to stay tuned for the video that will pop up on your screen after this video. In that episode of the Writing Witch podcast, I'm not only sharing with you my 3 favorite journal prompts for the season, but I'm also responding to the prompts myself in video diary format so that you can see real-life examples of how working with these themes can help you to navigate the seasons of life. The next tip is to do a wardrobe change out. As you might have noticed in my summer and spring videos, I wore a lot of pastel colors, and this autumn equinox time is when I actually put all of those clothes away in the basement and bring out my fall/winter wardrobe, which is when I kind of go back to my goth roots a little bit. My rising sign is Gemini, and in a way, I do kind of have split personalities. On the one hand, I'm playful and whimsical, and then on the other hand, I'm also dark and moody and mysterious. I like to embrace and play with this theme by dressing seasonally. So here's how I kind of discovered this fun little ritual that I do every year now. Ever since an early age, I've always kind of had a distinct sense of style, and I've always been attracted to a similar array of clothes and accessories. But what I noticed over many years of what I thought was my style switching up dramatically, off and on, was that actually I cycle through the same few looks. And once I started my witchy journey in my early 20s and began paying attention to how my energy responds to the changing of the seasons, I realized that my style is actually cyclical. I noticed that I tended to go to a goth or dark academia style in the fall, light academia in the winter, and then sort of cottage or fairycore whimsical style in the spring, and then I would shift to a sort of boho chic or sort of grunge boho look in the summer. So a few years ago, when I did a massive overhaul of my wardrobe with the intention of entering my 30s with a more sophisticated aesthetic, I gave away most of my more grunge goth and grunge boho things in favor of cleaner and neater looking versions of those vibes. So my overall look is a lot more cohesive now from season to season. So rather than going through these seemingly dramatic style changes each season, now I've come up with a more color coding system. I own a lot more clothing items than when I was younger as well, so I've discovered that it's both more practical as well as more fun to actually put my dark colored clothing away in boxes for the spring-summer season in favor of keeping whites and pastels readily on hand. And then I switch it out again for the fall. So since the spring and the fall equinox are moments of balance between darkness and light as they're shifting, it makes sense to also embrace that shifting from dark to light and back again in my wardrobe. It's a fun way to symbolically step into the next season version of myself, while also just offering an opportunity to clean and organize and make way for fresh new vibes for the season ahead. And that's kind of what my practice is all about. It's about looking at the magical vibes and seeing how things make me feel, and then building in practical habits and rituals that allow me to habitually embrace those energies as they shift throughout the seasons. The next tip is to make an autumn crown, kind of like the one that I'm wearing here. You could use natural materials or dried flowers, or you can just take the easy route like I did and use some fake stuff so that you can wear it again and again every year. If you guys would like to see a good tutorial of how to make these, please let me know in the comments. And or if you're not particularly crafty or you don't have time to make something like this, but you would want one, also post a comment and let me know, because I would be happy to make some of these and put them up in my Etsy shop. The next tip is to embrace the home and hearth vibes, or what they call cottage witch vibes, and maybe do some kind of autumn simmer pot just to get that energy going. Autumn is my favorite time to do simmer pots, and honestly, the main reasons are practical for me more so than magical, but the result is a magical tradition that really creates a sense of nostalgia for this time of the year. It can get so hot in the summer that even just the little bit of excess heat that a simmer pot would give off is more than I would want. As an eco-conscious person and a nature witch who just loves the experience of the elements and as raw a farm as possible each season, within reason of course, I tend to forego blasting the AC in favor of having the windows open and letting the fresh air blow in. So keeping the home as cool as naturally possible is something that I strive for most of the time. And when I do have to turn the AC on, I don't want to feel like I'm wasting electricity by also generating heat at the same time unnecessarily. Additionally, to be honest, I have never found a summer or spring simmer pot recipe that actually produced the desired fresh and strong scent that I would want for those times of the year. I found that since I associate with fall and winter, like cinnamon, nutmeg, vanilla, anise, allspice, etc., naturally give off strong, spicy aromas that can easily fill the house and has the potential to last for a pretty long time before having to dump the remains into the compost bucket. For whatever reason, when I try one of those spring-summer simmer pot recipes that calls for things like citrus fruit and sprigs of herbs, it never smells as fresh and strong as I would want it to, and I find that I would prefer to just put some essential oils in the diffuser instead. Maybe I'm doing something wrong. If you have like a special tip or a certain type of herb or fruit that has worked really well for you for spring and summer, do let me know because I am curious. But in the meantime, I just love having this as a sort of fall tradition. So when the days do start to get cool towards September, the idea of doing my first simmer pot in months is a cozy, inviting tradition that gets me excited for the specific time of year. I like to make a ritual out of it by programming the water with my intentions for a peaceful, comfortable, and cozy home for the fall and winter season ahead. I'm mindful of my personal correspondences for each ingredient that I'm adding, and I imagine the scented vapor filling myself and my home with good vibes. And to make this experience even extra witchy and magical, I love to do my simmer pots in some kind of enchanted cauldron. I have an ornate vintage silver saucepan that I like to use exclusively for simmer pots on the stove. I love to feel like a cottage witch cackling over her cauldron as I whip up the magical witch's brew. Another fun method I've discovered this year is the altar top cauldron method. This is where I use my spellbinding antique silver flame cauldron to create simmer pot magic even in the absence of a stovetop. Since discovering this magical hack, I've made it my mission to scour the antique shops for as many of these fun finds as possible so that I can share this magic with the customers of my home decor shop. Whenever I find one, I make sure to post it up for sale there. So if you would like one of these of your very own this fall season, I would love to invite you to join my newsletter list so you can be the first to know when I have one available. Spoiler alert, there might be one up there right now. The next tip is, of course, to decorate an altar or decorate your entire space for fall. If you've seen any of my videos, you know that decorating is one of the biggest ways that I personally like to celebrate the seasons. I like to go all out with an altar setup, an elaborate tablescape, and my Sabbath-themed Christmas tree that I update every 6 weeks. But if you're in the broom closet or you just don't have the time or desire to decorate your whole house like I do, even just doing something as simple as putting out a different wreath on the door or getting a seasonal bouquet of flowers or a candle is enough to give you the psychological trigger that the season has changed and that it's something to rejoice in and savor for the short time that this chapter of your life is here. It's a way of romanticizing your life and celebrating where you are in the journey of life. And of course, if you enjoy getting crafty, you can always make your own seasonal wreath, either with fake or dried flowers to use year after year, or you can harness some of that magic of the moment energy and actually use fresh flowers that you've either purchased or even picked yourself, and include maybe some herbs and greenery of the season to savor just for the short time while it lasts. The wreath is an ancient pagan symbol representing continuity in nature, and I like to make mine even more magical by weaving in magical symbols. I like to enchant them with positive intentions for a blessed and abundant home, and to place them in the home as a protection charm or an intention charm. Each one is one of a kind and made with positive intention for your peace, fulfillment, and abundance. So if you haven't already, I invite you to either make your own or check out the link that's on the screen now, and it'll also be linked down below. The next tip is to eat squash dishes like pumpkin pie, or also incorporating just apples. Since the next Sabbath, November's Eve / Halloween / Samhain, is often more a time of going for those heavier foods like squashes and root vegetables, apples are a really, really good theme to go for this time of the year. And who doesn't love an apple pie to just start getting into that autumn energy? The apple is considered to be a witchy symbol for many different reasons. The simplest and most obvious of which is just the symbolism present in the anatomy of the fruit itself. When you slice an apple horizontally, you can see the shape of a pentagram in its core, the 5 points of which represent the 5 elements: earth, air, fire, water, and spirit. If you slice it vertically, it resembles the womb of the goddess. I love learning about symbolism and mythology associated with simple everyday things like apples. So if this is something that you would like to see a video on going deeper, please leave me a comment and let me know. And while you're at it, it would mean so much to me if you could like this video, subscribe, and hit the bell button if you haven't done so already. This tells the YouTube gods that this is valuable content and should be shown to more people. The next tip is to go to a farmer's market or a place where you can pick your own apples or pumpkins, or even go wine tasting if you have vineyards in your area. This time of year presents a unique opportunity to connect with nature through seasonal eating and experiencing firsthand how our food is grown. We can celebrate the abundance of the harvest by visiting a farmer's market, a pick-your-own farm, or even harvesting from our own garden. By doing so, we can connect with our food and the land it comes from and honor the hard work of farmers and gardeners. It's one of the simplest yet most magical ways to get grounded with the earth element and to appreciate the beauty of the natural world around us. So take some time this season to explore local farms or gardens and experience the joy of harvesting your own food if possible. And speaking of food, this leads us into our next ritual, kitchen witchery. Kitchen witchcraft is the simple act of bringing mindfulness and intention into your cooking. By combining this practice with autumn themes such as gratitude and seasonal eating, we can really bring our kitchen magic to the next level. It's a perfect time to clean and redecorate our kitchen in a way that calls in the energy of our desired feelings for the season and the year ahead. The harvest season is also an invitation to try new recipes, learn more about the history and properties of foods and herbs, and to try our hand at food preservation techniques. This year, I've been learning even more about seasonal eating, traditional cooking skills, nutrition, and so much more. So some of my favorite things that I've been trying are pickling, fermenting, home brewing, water bath canning, and things like that. And I also have a really funny story about the day I purchased my canning pot. I was shopping at my local secondhand shop and I found this perfect huge black stock pot to use for my water bath canner. I also had a couple of interesting candlesticks in my cart to sell in my online shop, Hestia's Hearth Home Shop. So a random guy came up to me and asked, "Excuse me, may I ask what you use these things for?" When I told him that I was into home decor and home canning, he said, "Oh, it almost looks like you're a witch and this is your cauldron and spell supplies or something." Now, as I've mentioned in a recent blog when I did a witchy book haul, this particular store is run by a Christian company, and there have been times when my partner and I have experienced anti-pagan discrimination there when we asked if there were any witchy books, because it seems like sometimes they have them and usually they don't, and I'm guessing it's because whoever's working on certain days likes to put them out, and then if somebody else finds out later in the week, they may or may not get mad about it. I'm not sure. But in any case, at this point, I naturally tend to kind of have my guard up when I'm shopping there, just a little bit. So instead of spilling the tea when this guy asked me this question, I was just like, who knows? I could be a witch. And at that point, I did kind of sense that he was asking not out of judgment and more so out of curiosity, and I would have opened up a little bit more if he had shown more interest, but at that point his phone rang and he excused himself. But the funniest thing about this story is that on some days, it's probably blatantly obvious that I'm a witch based on the items in my cart, but this particular time, I would have thought that it was a lot less conspicuous since all I had was an innocent stock pot and some candlesticks. But I guess I am just obviously a witch through and through, even when I'm not really trying to be. The next tip is to go on a nature walk and collect leaves, nuts, or any other beautiful little nature gifts that are around you in your local environment. You can incorporate them into your decorations, into your spell work, or you can just set them on your altar as a reminder of the magic of the season. Next, this is an amazing time of the year to embrace that sort of back to school energy and dive into some academic pursuits of some kind. This can mean signing up for a new class, creating a new morning or night routine centered around reading or studying any subjects that you're genuinely curious about, or just getting more hands-on about anything that you've been studying for the past year. For example, I'm really starting to get my hands dirty with canning and preserving, whereas earlier in the year I was more so studying and researching. As a writing witch, I love this time of year for starting a new journal or picking back up an older journal that I haven't touched in a while, where I document my magical path, take notes on magical subjects I'm learning about, or just getting bookish in general. It can simply look like carving out 15 minutes once or twice a week to sit outside with a cup of tea or a glass of wine, taking in the subtle shifts in the environment while enjoying a relaxing, witchy, or inspirational read. Of course, this can be any magical book, or even a blog or a magazine, or even audiobooks and YouTube channels and podcasts, but in particular, Starlight Magazine has been my absolute favorite this year. So if you haven't heard, Starlight is a seasonal publication put out by my friend and colleague Tanae Stewart, the Witch of Lupin Hollow, and I have been a regular contributor to this magazine since winter 2021. I just find it so relaxing to sit outside in the garden with some relaxing music, reading about how other witches relate to the seasons, astrology, divination, spell work, gods and goddesses, meditation, self-care. Pretty much any magical subject that you can think of is in this magazine. At the time when I'm filming this, the current fall issue is still on its way to me in the mail, so I'm showing you last year's issue on the screen now. The fall issues always bring in the magical autumn vibes for both the autumn equinox and Samhain/Halloween later in the season. It's perfect for sitting outside or indoors by the fire, depending on what kind of fall day it is, just enjoying a cup of tea or a glass of wine and learning about witchy subjects or revisiting witchy subjects from a perspective that maybe you haven't heard before. For this upcoming issue, I wrote an article about shadow work, all about accepting and integrating our inner darkness and transmuting our perceived weaknesses or flaws into our own special superpowers. I even submitted some hand-drawn artwork for this one, and I am so excited to see how it turned out. So if you'd like to get in on my new favorite, easy and relaxing seasonal tradition for this sort of back-to-school, bookish fall energy, then I would love to invite you to order your copy of Starlight Magazine in either a physical copy delivered to your door, or you can get instant access to a PDF file version. I will say that print copies do tend to run out, so the Lupin Hollow team recommends ordering ASAP to make sure that you get to hold the pages in your hands, if, like me, you're that type of bibliophile who just loves to turn real pages. And if you purchase through my affiliate link on this YouTube video, a percentage of your order will go directly to me and directly supports me to continue creating magical content for you. So thank you so much for your support. And of course, the autumn equinox season is an amazing time of the year to update your gratitude rituals. Gratitude is one of the most powerful themes of this checkpoint on the wheel of the year that we call Maban, or the second harvest. The autumn equinox is even known to some as the witch's Thanksgiving, and it's a powerful time to embrace the energy of gratitude, to become more fulfilled in your life, as well as become more energetically attractive to your desires for manifestation. The season of the witch is here, the final sabbat on the wheel of the year. A time to imagine and remember the ancestors and past Novembers. Wintertime is drawing near, the darkest time of cold and fear. But we move forward brave of heart, for every end is a brand new start. Samhain or November's Eve, a time of crunchy fallen leaves. The final harvest of the fall, a mystical season for witches all. Fall is known as shadow season by many witches and for good reason, to look at darkness as a friend and companion at the summer's end. A time to journal on our fears and heal from times we've shed our tears. To bid farewell to the cycle past, knowing it was never meant to last. A time to shed away the old, like the trees, blazing gold. To celebrate what's gone before and create space to experience more. A time to bring the witchy vibes and cast our spells to transform our lives. A time to lay the past to rest and step out in our witchy best. A time to cozy up with food that brings about the harvest mood. To whip up all the autumn snacks and listen to those spooky tracks. A time to explore the darker themes in movies, books, and our own dreams. To conjure up a witch's brew, a simmer pot, or pumpkin stew. A time to dress up and perform, to shapeshift into a different form, to make light of all the spooky things, and embrace the magic the season brings. Greetings, magical mavens, and welcome to this November's Eve / Halloween / Samhain bucket list. So if you're new around here, on this channel, I like to look at the Wheel of the Year sabbats, not just as 8 specific days on the calendar when we have to celebrate, but actually I like to look at it as splitting the whole year into 8 seasons that are 6 weeks long. This gives us permission to not try to cram all of our magicalness into just these 8 specific days or even just that weekend or that week. It gives us permission to actually incorporate the themes of that season into our everyday lives for that entire 6 weeks surrounding the season. And it also just gives us the opportunity to experience more mindfulness and more magic in our everyday lives. So of course, being the writing witch, tip number 1 in this series is always to do your seasonal journaling. For each of the 8 sabbats on the Wheel of the Year, I like to look at 3 different journal prompts that help us to embody the most important themes of that season into our everyday lives. The 3 themes I like to focus most on this time of year are ancestors, darkness, and death. Pretty serious sounding subjects, I know, but for me, part of being a witch is learning to embrace the full cycle of the human experience, and this time of year is an invitation to lean into that sense of balance in approachable and festive ways. Now in this video, we're just going to be lightly touching on some of my favorite fun traditions for the season, but for a much deeper dive into these themes and how to incorporate them into both the magical and the mundane aspects of your everyday life this season so that you can experience more joy and fulfillment, I invite you to check out the video that I did last year, which will pop up on the end screen at the end of this video. And of course, you're also invited to join me and my community of writing witches over in the Writing Witch Coven, where we're doing our late fall seasonal living challenge right now to support each other in embodying these themes in whatever ways feel most empowering for each of us as individuals. Your membership will also include access to physical and digital copies of these gorgeous information sheets and grimoire prompt pages that I've designed for you. To learn more about that, check out the link that's on the screen right now, which will also be linked down below. The next tip is to do your shadow work and/or any banishing rituals. So the age-old question, what actually is shadow work? In the witchy, spiritual, and personal development communities, you've probably heard this term being thrown around, but oftentimes it isn't clear what exactly it means. Shadow work refers to the process of exploring and integrating the unconscious or repressed aspects of ourselves. It involves delving into the darker, less desirable parts of our psyche, such as our fears, traumas, and unresolved emotions. By shining a light on these hidden aspects, we can gain a deeper understanding of ourselves and ultimately achieve personal growth and transformation. It's actually a term that originates not from the spiritual community, but actually from Jungian psychology. But witches love it because it's one of those lovely instances of where science finally is able to explain something that we've been intuitively aware of. There are many, many ways to do shadow work, and a shadow work practice can look totally different from one person to another. But again, being the writing witch, journaling is always my favorite go-to technique. Your shadow work journaling practice can be as simple or as complex as feels good for you. The simplest way that I've found is by simply doing a practice called automatic writing. This is where you set a timer and jot down everything and anything that comes to mind around any subject that triggers you. The key to automatic writing is to not pause your writing to correct your spelling, to carefully choose your words, or to censor yourself in any way. You want to bypass the critical conscious mind and allow the subconscious or the ego to express openly. Once your timer is stopped, you can read over what you've written and do a little self-analysis. Sometimes something will come up that surprises you. Other times, it'll simply be putting into words something that you're already aware that you've been thinking or feeling. Either way, you now have the power of clarity and can decide what to do with that information. In many cases, just shining a light of awareness on a shadow or a trigger will allow it to easily dissipate on its own. Other times, you'll need to do some additional shadow work to release the tension around any subject that is still triggering you. This can look like going to traditional therapy, which I don't think is just for crazy people. We're all a little bit crazy and we can all use some therapy. But this can also look like simply writing affirmations that are the opposite of any negative self-talk, for example. Or it can be learning techniques like the emotional freedom technique, also known as tapping. I made a video a while back on tapping with a tapping expert, so I invite you to check out that video after this one if you're curious to learn more. I also recently wrote an in-depth article on lots of different techniques to simply incorporate shadow work into your life, both in more sort of serious self-help ways, as well as in more fun and expressive ways. And you can find that article in the Starlight Magazine, which will be linked on the screen right now and will also be linked down below. The next tip is to do some pumpkin magic. Pumpkins and pumpkin spice have become universal symbols for the autumn season. And unless you're one of those people who are anti-pumpkin everything, we can kind of all embrace the magic of pumpkins in our spiritual practices. Last fall, I did an entire video going into depth on the meaning and symbolism of the pumpkin and how you can work with it in a way that resonates with you in a personally meaningful way. But for a quick tip, you can totally just draw or carve a symbol into a pumpkin that represents your intentions for the season or the year ahead. Since pumpkins represent abundance, prosperity, and stability to me, I've done spells in the past where I drew a sigil related to my desires in those areas on a pumpkin. I like to use the sigil creation technique where I start by writing out a sentence to state my intention, and then I use the shapes of the letters to create a symbol that feels energetically representative of the sentiment. But for a super simple spell for prosperity, protection, and balance in all areas of life, you can just simply draw or carve the symbol of a pentagram or a pentacle. It represents the balance of all 5 elements: earth, air, fire, water, and spirit. These are the alchemical building blocks of our reality, both internally and in the world around us, and you can learn more about how to balance them for self-empowerment in the video that's linked on the screen now. And interestingly enough, the spices that make up pumpkin spice have powerful magical correspondences similar to that of the pumpkin itself. You can simply do a little magic with your morning coffee by stirring intention into it with awareness of the plant magic that's in your cup. I've also made a full video on this, which will be linked on the screen or down below if I've already run out of links to put on the screen. The next tip is, of course, to decorate an altar for the season, or go all out and make your entire home into a decorative altar of sorts. If you've seen any of my videos, you know that decorating is one of the biggest ways that I personally like to celebrate the seasons. I like to go all out with an altar setup, an elaborate tablescape, and a Sabbath-themed Christmas tree that I update with new decor every 6 weeks. But if you're in the broom closet or you just don't have the time, space, or desire to decorate your whole house, even doing something as simple as just putting up a different wreath on the door or getting a seasonal bouquet of flowers is enough to give you the psychological trigger that the season has changed and that it's something to rejoice in and savor for the short time that it's here. It's a magical way of romanticizing your life and celebrating where you are on the journey of life. The next tip is to eat squash and/or root vegetables. Hardy fall crops like squashes and root vegetables have a long history of keeping our ancestors fed and healthy over the winters. Before we had food preservation technology, humans had to rely on natural food sources that had the capacity to stay fresh for long periods of time. Winter squashes like pumpkins and butternut squash, as well as root vegetables like potatoes, carrots, and beets, can stay good for several months when kept in cool, dry conditions. Back in the olden days, our ancestors would have to keep these resources in a root cellar or buried in pots in the ground to ensure their longevity. As a way to honor our ancestors, as well as the earth herself, I like to make an abundance ritual in the form of a mindful meal. It's a similar statement to the practice of celebrating Thanksgiving with these types of foods. When the days start to get crisp and cool, I love to do a little witching in the kitchen. Have you ever tried making an intuitive soup or stew? It is so much fun. You get to feel like a witch cackling over your cauldron. All you have to do is start by boiling a pot of water and then go around your kitchen, pantry, and/or garden collecting ingredients that would taste good together and would contribute to the vibe of coziness, prosperity, and gratitude. Bonus points if it includes any seasonal produce, things you grew or harvested yourself, or anything that has ancestral or magical connotations for you. Keep your mind on themes of gratitude and abundance, and maybe even bring in music or play a movie in the background that evokes the desired feelings as you cook. You can directly program the soup with your intention by chanting your incantations or mantras or power words over it. I like to say a spell while stirring the stew clockwise to represent moving my intentions forward. I also draw the shape of a pentacle with a spoon to represent wholeness and balance. I'll also note here that if you're a meat eater, meats, especially beef, are traditionally used this time of year. It's said that the Celts would kill some of their livestock at the Festival of Samhain, both to make hearty food available and to have less animals to feed during the months when resources would be scarce. I don't eat meat personally, so the hearty veg are the way to go for me, but feel free to make a meat stew if that's something that's aligned with your personal spiritual path. Preferably meat that comes from animals who were hunted fairly or were treated well, rather than from factory farms. This is a way to honor and respect Mother Earth and the other creatures we share our planet with. The next tip is to put your garden to bed or rake leaves or do any sort of outdoor activity that helps you to feel like you're preparing your home for the winter season. It's also an opportunity to get outside and feel that crisp air one last time before starting to go into hibernation if you're anything like me and you live in a very cold climate. Since gardening and composting are big parts of my practice as a green witch, this late fall season represents the time of putting the garden to bed, so to say. It involves getting hands-on with harvesting the last of the crops and returning any leftover plant matter or soil to the compost pile along with some fallen leaves. This is the literal manifestation of the compost phase of what we call the plant, tend, harvest, compost cycle that we see reflected in nature and in our own lives. As I'm returning these natural materials to the earth to be transformed into new food for future plants, I'm also reflecting on anything that's being put to rest in my own life. This year, I'm actually moving house, so there's a real sense of closing one chapter and transmuting past challenges into fertile soil for the new life that I'm creating. The next tip is to do a divination ritual, preferably by candlelight. Halloween time is traditionally a season of divination, where people seek to connect with the spiritual realm and gain insights into the future. From ancient practices like bobbing for apples to modern tarot card readings, these divination rituals add an element of mystery and excitement to the Halloween festivities. Whether it's doing a tarot card reading for the year ahead, using your pendulum to speak to a spiritual archetype, or even trying your hand at traditional apple peel divination from the Victorian era, Halloween offers a unique opportunity to explore the mystical side of life and embrace the unknown. Now, personally, I tend to do rituals that are mainly intuitive and are focused on tapping into my own higher self. But if you want to get super spooky with it and try some other types of magic where maybe you're connecting with spirits or attempting to predict the future, if that's your cup of tea, I highly recommend doing a YouTube search or a Google search on traditional Samhain and Halloween divination and see if you find something fun that sparks your interest. And if you're not into doing divination for yourself, either because you don't know how or because you just prefer an outside perspective, it's also a really good time this season to get a divination reading from a trusted community member. I happen to offer tarot card readings in a variety of different styles to help you get the answers that you're looking for at this particular transitional moment in your life. If that's something you would be curious about, I have linked that down below, and I look forward to working with you. The next tip is to watch your favorite Halloween movies. So I mentioned in some of the other videos in this series that a lot of movies that people add to their list of favorite Halloween movies, for me, are actually related to totally different sabbats. For example, a lot of people pick Practical Magic, which, yes, there is a Halloween scene at the end of it, but the vast majority of the story actually takes place around the summer solstice. And then the same thing with the movie The Craft. It actually doesn't have to do with Halloween at all, and the whole thing pretty much takes place around May's Eve. But this is that time of year when it is actually time to watch Hocus Pocus, or just any of those movies that are really the Halloween vibes for me. Now, I do have a video from a while back where I went into depth on a list of movies that I feel embody the themes of November's Eve / Samhain energy for me. But here's a quick rundown of some of my favorite movies and TV shows for this time of year. Some that are super seasonal and others that are more vaguely related to the themes of the season. Some that I really love and others that I think are at least worth watching once. If you want me to go into depth on these, let me know in the comments, but for right now, here is just a simple list. For movies, The Crow, Interview with the Vampire, Queen of the Damned, The Picture of Dorian Gray, The Lost Boys, Death Becomes Her, The Ninth Gate, Hocus Pocus, of course, Halloween Town, Sleepy Hollow, The Legend of Sleepy Hollow, The Worst Witch from the 80s, Harry Potter, obviously, The Nightmare Before Christmas, The Wicker Man, and I Married a Witch. For TV, The Good Witch, Witches of East End, Sleepy Hollow, A Discovery of Witches, Charmed, the original version, but the new version isn't bad, Buffy the Vampire Slayer, Once Upon a Time, The Worst Witch from the 2000s, Vampire Diaries, the originals, and True Blood. I'm probably going to think of a ton more as soon as I'm done uploading this video, but oh well. What are some of your favorite movies to watch during this time of year? Whether it be something that I've heard of, we can relate about that, or if it's something that I haven't heard of that I need to check out, please post your faves in the comments. The next tip is to wear a costume. Whether or not you're going to be going to a Halloween party or going trick-or-treating with your kids, which I don't have kids, and for the past several years I haven't actually gone to any Halloween parties, but it's still a value of mine to embrace that sort of magical, wearing a disguise, trickster type of energy of this season, even if it's just to watch movies with my sister or literally just to do like a fun photo shoot or something. Getting dressed up for Halloween is not just for kids, and it's not even just for people with social lives. My next favorite thing to do this time of year is to watch spooky documentaries. I am not the biggest spooky witch. I'm more of a balanced witch where I take inspiration from both the darkness and the light. But when I am going to get into some weird documentaries about vampires and zombies and whatever other weird creepy subjects are out there, I always find myself doing that this time of year. I kind of really get into it and then I get it out of my system, and then by the time the winter solstice season is rolling around, I've had my fill of it for the year. The winter solstice tide is here, the darkest time on the wheel of the year. With shortest days and longest nights, we focus on our inner light. With the rebirth of our sun, a brand new cycle has now begun. We bid the passing year farewell and cast our hopeful new year spell. Whether we live on desert sand or a sparkling winter wonderland, amid the darkness or the snow, we keep the light within aglow. Greetings, magical mavens, and welcome to this winter solstice / Yule bucket list. So if you're new around here on this channel, I like to look at the wheel of the year, not just as 8 specific days on the calendar, but as literally splitting up the year into 8 different seasons, each that are about 6 weeks long. So this liberates us from the idea that we have to cram all of our magical ideas into one specific day, or even just that weekend or that week that's closest to the Sabbat itself. And it gives us permission to make our entire season feel magical, and it allows us the space and the sustainability in our schedule to actually have time to embody the most magical and powerful themes of each season in our everyday lives. So of course, since this is the Writing Witch channel, the first tip is of course to do your seasonal journaling. For each of the 8 seasons on the Witch's calendar, I like to pick 3 main themes for each one of those and turn them into journal prompts. The winter solstice, aka Yule or midwinter, is the shortest day and longest night of the year, celebrated around December 22nd. Regardless of what part of the world, which spiritual path, or which historical tradition we look at, just about the whole of the human race seems to agree that the coldest, darkest time of the year holds an inherent sacredness. It makes perfect sense during this time of year when the sun seems to be at its weakest and the earth is hibernating that we would spend the long evenings indoors, celebrating that which keeps us warm, cozy, and alive. The 3 themes I like to focus on most this time of year are rebirth, generosity, and the light in the darkness. In this video, I'm sharing with you just some of my favorite fun traditions for the season, but for a much deeper dive into these themes and how to incorporate them into both your magical and your mundane aspects of your life this season to experience more joy and fulfillment, I invite you to check out the video I did last year, which will pop up on the screen at the end of this video. And of course, you're also invited to join us in the Writing Witch Coven, where we're doing our early winter seasonal living challenge to stay consistent in our witchy seasonal living lifestyle. We're working with these themes to embody them in our own lives in ways that are truly beneficial to us as individuals. Your membership will also include access to these lovely information sheets and prompt pages that I've designed for the season, including printable versions and physical copies mailed to your door. To learn more and sign up, I invite you to check out the link that's on the screen now, which will also be linked down below. The next tip is to make a wreath. Making a Yule wreath is not only a beautiful way to connect with the winter season, but it also allows you to tap into the ancient traditions of wreath making. In ancient times, wreaths were carefully crafted using plants that held symbolic and magical properties for blessings and protection. By creating your own Yule wreath, you can infuse it with your own intentions and magical energy, making it a powerful symbol of hope and resilience for the winter season. Plus, it's a fun and creative activity that you can do yourself or with loved ones. To me, the midwinter wreath in particular has a beautiful sense of symbolism. Not only does the circular shape represent the continuing cycle of life and the wheel of the year itself, but the fact that we make the winter wreath out of evergreen branches makes it even more meaningful. The evergreens are a powerful symbol of eternal life that reminds us that no matter how cold or dark or barren the land may seem to be, Mother Earth is still alive, simply in a state of rest. It reminds us that even if we're going through a dark time in our lives, or if we need more rest and can't be as active all the time, we too are going through cycles. We're alive within and preparing for new growth in the new year. I love making wreaths, and it's such a relaxing and creative craft that allows me to get out of my head and into my playful inner child's crafty mode. You can make a wreath using natural materials from your environment, or even with things you get from the florist. But if you'd prefer to make something that can last year after year and be part of future midwinters to come, it can still be magical to use artificial greenery. Personally, I like to use a mix of artificial and real, preferably properly dried foliage that will preserve well. And here's a tip if you're not very crafty, or if you want to bring the magic of the natural elements into your home each winter without having to make a whole new wreath from scratch. Make or buy a simple artificial evergreen wreath and then simply stick sprigs of real plants and herbs into it to temporarily spruce it up for the season. See what I did there? Spruce, evergreen. Spruce is a type of evergreen. Anyway, this trick works really well for decorating your tree as well. I was not raised with Christmas or Yule in my family, so when I first found my witchy path in adulthood, I wanted to do things right, so to say, with natural evergreen plants in my home. So my first Yule tree was just a crappy hand-me-down little artificial tree that my partner at the time's mom gave us just so we would have a little something at our place. And I made it feel like a real tree by stuffing it with real evergreen sprigs that magically manifested in front of my city apartment building at the time. Well, I count it as a manifestation anyway. It just so happened that my neighbor trimmed their evergreen hedges at that perfect time for me to literally spruce up my tree. And now I've made a tradition out of bringing some kind of real evergreen that I foraged from outside into my Yule decorations every year. The next tip is to try your hand at a Yule log intention setting spell. On a similar note to the wreath and the tree, there's the tradition of the Yule log. Now, the Yule log is another ancient tradition with mysterious origins. We don't know exactly where it came from, but it's believed that the Yule log was originally a Nordic tradition where a large log was burned to celebrate the winter solstice. The log was decorated with holly, ivy, and other winter foliage, and was large enough to be burned for 12 days. This is potentially where we got the idea for the 12 days of Christmas. Today, many people still celebrate the Yule log tradition by burning a log in their fireplace or creating a Yule log cake. Now, one thing about my magical path is that, well, I'm a bit of a pyro. My moon is in Aries, and nothing warms my little wild heart more than burning shit. So when I learned that there were magical traditions that involved fire, well, you can say it really lit me up. The Yule log has been one of those things in my witchy path that has always excited and motivated me and helped me manifest my dreams, believe it or not. You see, when I first learned about the magical history and traditions of the Yuletide season, I lived in a city apartment with no ability to have a fire of any kind besides just candles. I did a mock-style Yule log that year, where I brought a log inside to place inside my unusable Victorian fireplace, which I was using as my altar at the time. I surrounded it with candles to represent fire and set the intention that one day I would be in a position to burn a real Yule log. Well, the following year, my wish came true. I was unexpectedly presented with the opportunity to temporarily move into a home with a yard where I could have an outdoor fire whenever I wanted. That year, I did a lot of fire magic all year round, but around the Yule time, I did a really fun Yule log spell where I found a pine log in my neighborhood and went on a hunt in my yard to find natural trimmings to decorate it with. I tied it with juniper from the garden along with pine cones and ivy and anything else I could find that was still growing, which interestingly included the garden thyme plant that I had planted that summer, which for some reason was still able to be alive underneath the snow. I didn't know that was possible until then. But thyme is a magical plant that represents protection and cleansing and clearing, so it was perfect to add to this New Year intention setting spell. And then to turn it into what I, as a writing witch, see as a more powerful version of a spell, I made a ritual out of writing my desires for the year on some of my magical handmade spell paper. Then I folded the page and stuffed it with magical herbs that aligned with my intention, along with a sparkler for good pyro measure, and I tied them to the log as well. So to activate the spell, I burned this magical log in my outdoor fireplace for a Yule that I would always remember. The following year, I did have to move back to a city apartment style lifestyle again, and I missed my magical fires greatly. ever since then, one of my biggest goals was to manifest a life where I could have fires freely again. And wouldn't you know it, this year I finally can. I've just recently moved into a new home with a yard, and I definitely plan on doing the spell again, so stay tuned. But that being said, last year, when I did still live in an apartment, I did do a tutorial video on how to enjoy the magic of a Yule fire spell, even if you live in an apartment. This tutorial goes way above and beyond the usual suggestions, which are to make a Yule log cake or to simply place candles around a symbolic log. All you need are a pine cone, some magical ingredients of your choice, and somewhere you can sneak off to be a little bit of a pyro. In my case, I had an outdoor patio at the time, and even though I wasn't technically allowed to have a grill or a fireplace out there, I was able to burn small things in my cauldron occasionally at night when no one was watching. Usually just petition papers, things that would go up in smoke pretty quickly and be done with. But last year, there was a massive blizzard that snowed everyone in for Christmas. The snow had accumulated on my patio in just such a way that it completely shielded me from sight. Not that anyone was out there paying attention anyway. So I took advantage of this happy accident and built myself an enchanting snow cave and imagined that I was a snow fairy or a cottage witch somewhere off in a magical wood. But since pine wood burns so quickly and pine cones are so small, you could definitely take this Yule cone somewhere outside away from your apartment to burn it relatively fast. Another option that I've never tried myself but might be really fun is to go to a park where there's a structural grill or fireplace and burn your Yule log or your Yule cone there. At one of my local parks, there are these little awnings that people use for family barbecues and things like that, and they have built-in grills that you could totally have a little fire in if you were willing to brave the cold. You could bring hot chocolate in thermoses and make a whole thing out of it if you wanted to. And of course, one of the best things to do this time of year is to decorate an altar for the season or just decorate your entire space. If you haven't already, create a Yule altar in your home. This can be a small table or shelf where you can display candles, crystals, and other items that represent the winter solstice to you, as well as the return of the sun. Add items like pine cones, holly, and mistletoe to your altar to represent the winter season. And if you're like me, you're probably going to want to use some kind of sun symbolism. Actually, for all of my seasonal altars, I let the centerpiece be this giant sun candle holder that I've had since I was a teenager, and I just create the rest of the altar around that. You can also add a Yule log or a wreath to bring in those plants of the season that we talked about. And take time to sit at your altar, meditate, and set your intentions for the new year. If, like me, you can't craft your Yule log outdoors because your fingers cease to work in the cold, your indoor altar can be a great place to do the crafting and journaling parts of the spell before heading outside to burn it. But personally, I like to kind of make my entire home into one big altar to the season. As a home and hearth witch, my home is my magical sanctuary, so whenever possible, I go all out with meaningful decorations so that my surroundings mimic the magic of the season we're in. The next tip is to go outside and observe. So even if you're like me and there's a very good chance that you're in the middle of a blizzard right now, I still like to challenge myself to just step outside, whether it's for an actual nature walk or if it's just to stand out there for a few minutes and just experience what nature is doing during this coldest and darkest time of the year. Are you looking for a simple, free, and meaningful way to connect with the winter solstice without even necessarily letting anyone know that you're celebrating the pagan Yule? Why not just take a winter nature walk? I know, if you live in a cold environment like me, easier said than done, but it's totally worth it sometimes to bundle up in warm clothes and head outside to enjoy the crisp air and beautiful winter scenery, even if it's only for a few minutes. Look for signs of the winter season, like icicles, snowflakes, and animal tracks. I also like to see what plant life I can spot, like red winter berries, ivy leaves, or other evergreens, or even just noticing the beautiful textures of the dead plants that are outside. Like on the day that I'm recording this, it's still my first week in my new home and I'm still observing the nature that's around me. And in the field outside of my window of my office, I noticed that our first accumulating snowfall landed on this field of what to me before just looked like a bunch of brownness across the street. But once the snow fell, I noticed that they were beautiful dried thistles that looked really beautiful with a layer of ice over them. Sometimes seasonal living is just about observing the beauty that's around us and finding ways to see the magical in the mundane by simply being a little bit more mindful and paying closer attention and appreciating what it is that's around us. Take this time on your walk to reflect on the past year and set some intentions for the new year while enjoying the peace and tranquility of nature. Walking in nature has been shown to reduce stress and improve mental health, making it a perfect activity for the winter season when being cooped up and having a lack of sunlight may have led to some seasonal depression. So grab a friend or go solo and take a winter walk to connect with the beauty of the season. This is also a great way to find magical gifts from Mother Nature to put on your altar, in your decor, or in your Yule log spell. Like when I found those evergreen clippings in my old neighborhood to add to my first tree. This year, I've just moved into a much more natural area, and I want to celebrate by gathering items from my new environment and bringing them inside to celebrate starting the new year in this new place where I'll be able to connect with nature all the more. And if you're someone who believes in connecting literally or symbolically with the spirits of nature or the spirits of the land you're on, this is a great way to do that. Whether you're collecting things to bring into your home or just observing and appreciating what you see on your walk, nature is always my first and most basic go-to for connecting with the true essence of any seasonal sabbat. And of course, one of my favorite things to do is to just watch my favorite Christmassy movies. Now, if you've caught any of the other 6 videos in this series, you recall that I had a whole list of favorite magical witchy movies for every other season. But honestly, this, what most people would call the most magical time of the year, is one of the hardest ones for me when it comes to witchy movies. Like, does anyone actually know of any movies that really embody the witchy or pagan side of the Yuletide season? Since this time of year is so bombarded with the mainstream Christmas movies, it seems like that's what most of us end up watching. I didn't even grow up celebrating Christmas, but even my Muslim family loved us some Home Alone. I also love classics like The Nutcracker, A Christmas Carol, The Nightmare Before Christmas, and The Snowman. Heck, I've even learned to enjoy some of the cheesy made-for-TV or made-for-streaming services movies that come out this time of year when looking for something festive to watch. But my long-running favorite would have to be The Snow Queen. It's one of those old Hallmark artisan movies from the early 2000s that brought old fairy tales to life and inspired so much of my creative childhood mind. It isn't really Christmassy or witchy, it just personifies the magic of the seasons in a sort of folkloric fairy tale type of way. But what are your recommendations for the magical Yuletide films? Let me know, because I'm always open to new ideas on that. Next, I invite you to try some kind of mulled wine or glögg or wassail, or even just a non-alcoholic mulled cider of some kind. So I have a confession to make. I am obsessed with cider and wine and spices. I play with combinations of these things all year round in various shapes and forms, but this season is truly the season if ever there was one. For me, this is a sort of continuation of the themes of the autumn time, the abundance of the harvest and alchemizing the gifts of the earth into something that can last through the winter and possibly even be transformed into something greater than the sum of the parts. So I always love learning about the traditional foods and drinks of this time of year when the natural human instinct has long been to feast on the richest delicacies left over from the year's bounty. Mulled ciders, wines, wassails, and clogs are basically just another excuse to bring out the cauldron and conjure up a witch's brew. If you're one for following recipes, I recommend looking up recipes for traditional wassail and glug, or even any modern mulled wine or cider concoctions. But if you're like me, well, I still recommend learning the history and traditional ingredients of such things, but then feel free to just borrow ideas for inspiration for your very own concoction. I'm a strong believer in using whatever you have available and intuitively brewing up something that feels and tastes like the vibe you're trying to evoke for the season. And if you keep the magical properties of the winter spices in mind, this becomes all the more magical. So if you'd like to know more about that, I actually just wrote a whole magical article for that for Starlight Magazine. So if you haven't heard, Starlight Magazine is a seasonal publication that comes out 4 times a year, and it's by my friend and colleague Tanae Stewart, the Witch of Lupin Hollow. I have been blessed to be a contributor to this magazine regularly since it started back in 2021, and I think my very first one was actually a winter one, so this is kind of a full circle moment. But this year, I wrote all about the magical plants and herbs of winter, specifically ones that you have access to and you can work with in practical and magical ways by just bringing in a little bit of mindfulness to your holiday cooking and holiday crafting. If you would like to read this article along with several other amazing articles by other diverse witches in the community who have magical ideas about this time of year, I invite you to grab your copy. And I want to say thank you so much to anyone who has already purchased a copy through my affiliate link. That always helps me so much, and I am so grateful that more people get to experience the magic that not just myself, but all these other magical witches who contribute to the magazine have to share with the world. It's one of my favorite things this time of year to cozy up with a Starlight Magazine and a cup of hot cocoa and just learn a little bit of something new or a new perspective on something I already knew about this magical time of year. If you're interested in other things like astrology, herbs, crystals, recipes, gods, goddesses, or even secular witchcraft, all of these things can be found in Starlight Magazine through the diverse group of writers. So if that is something you're interested in, I invite you to check out my affiliate link, which is on the screen and down below. And if you're like me and you love having a physical book or magazine to turn the pages of the old-fashioned way, then I invite you to join my newsletter list. Typically, Starlight Magazine's physical copies sell out very, very quickly, so I always make sure that I let my newsletter subscribers know right away as soon as it comes out. By the time these YouTube videos come out is once I've already received my physical copy in the mail, had time to get some videos of it, and then had time to edit the video and get it out to you, by which time typically only digital copies remain, which are still absolutely worth having because the articles are amazing, and if you're someone who is a minimalist and you're not into creating physical products unnecessarily, that is definitely the option for you. But in any case, I would love to have you on the newsletter list because we do all kinds of magical stuff over there, as well as having first dibs as soon as things are available. Now that being said, I have probably never quite made the exact same Yule brew twice, and that's part of the fun. Some years I was snowed in and had to get creative with whatever ingredients I happened to have on hand. Other times I've intentionally added things to my shopping cart that I wanted to try adding, whether for its flavor, traditional value, or magical properties, or all of the above. The possibilities are endless, and as with all things, stir it clockwise and speak or think your intentions or incantations over it to make it a little drinkable potion for prosperity in the new year. The next tip is to find a cozy fireplace to sit by. So this tip is similar to the one about the Yule log, but slightly different. This tip is mainly for those of us who don't have the luxury of a real working fireplace or wood-burning stove inside our homes. It's really only for the past few generations that it's become uncommon for everyday people like us to have access to the simple human behavior of sitting by the fire. It's both a mundane and magical thing depending on how you look at it. It was one of the simplest and most basic things that made humans human for thousands of years. And yet now, for some of us, it's become a rare and magical experience to get together around a flame with loved ones, stories, or even just a good book. In the olden days, around the fire was where everything happened, especially during this cold, dark time of the year. And a big part of my spiritual practice is just getting to honor the elements in simple ways, like perhaps our ancestors might have done regularly on a daily basis. So I have a yearly tradition of finding some way to sit by a burning fireplace at least once in this season. As a kid, I have fond memories of gathering by the big fireplace in the park casino above the local toboggan hill with my family to warm up between sledding ventures. I always loved not just the warmth and enchanting lighting, but also the smell of the firewood and the chattering of other humans gathering around it. In recent years, my partner and I have looked around town for restaurants and pubs that tend to have lit fireplaces during this time of year, and trying to get seating as close to those fireplaces as we possibly can. You may know someone who has a working fireplace whom you may wish to visit with this season. Or you might even be a lucky person like my mom who actually has one that you've yet to clean out and learn how to use. Or if you're feeling fancy, you might even be able to rent an Airbnb that has a working fireplace just to get that experience. This time of year is the perfect motivation to challenge yourself to find a fireplace, even if it means getting outside of your usual routines and trying something new or different. It gets to be fun. And my next tip is to incorporate some kind of sun symbolism into your altar or your decorating scheme. One of the simplest ways to get back to basics and peel back the layers of cultural connotations down to the most core level meaning of this time of year is to focus on sun symbolism. For most pagans, the real reason for the season, in its most basic and ancient form, is the veneration of the sun itself. Before the winter solstice became the birth of the Son of God, it was the birth of the sun god. If we look back far enough in any culture, all religious belief and tradition stems back to the simple appreciation of the dance between the earth and the sun, and how those are the things that keep us alive as human beings. In this season that encompasses the shortest days and longest nights of the year, we're naturally called to think of the source of the warmth and light that allows us and our environment to live and grow. This season of the rebirth of the sun is also the season of the new year for a good reason. It's an invitation to say out with the old and in with the new as we allow the baggage of the old year to die with the sun and our new selves to be reborn with the sun on the solstice. For this reason, I have a personal tradition of topping my solstice tree not with a Star of Bethlehem or an angel, but instead with the sun. And whether or not I happen to be able to see the sunset through the gray clouds, I salute it by gazing into it, thanking it, wishing it a happy birthday, and allowing its light to cleanse and recharge my energy. Especially this time of year when so many of us are suffering from lack of vitamin D and potentially some seasonal depression, it's the perfect time to soak up the sun's rays with intention whenever possible. Sometimes it's a good way to stay grounded in a little bit of a daily gratitude ritual by remembering to pause and be grateful every time that we notice the sun shining on us. It's also the perfect season for sun gazing for practical reasons, because staring directly into the sun would be far more dangerous to our eyes any other time of the year. During the sunset around this time of year, I like to stare straight at the sun and feel that magic and power penetrating my soul. I don't know how safe it's supposedly considered to be, but a long time ago I learned about this practice of sun gazing and to do it mindfully, do it intuitively, do it safely, but it is something that I like to do particularly this time of year to really soak up the sun's energies and that vitamin D for just a few seconds a day. When the sun is so dim and far away, I find that it's the perfect amount of light to burn through my energetic baggage without burning out my retinas. So to dive even deeper into my 3 favorite themes for this season, I invite you to check out this video right here from last year, where I'm sharing with you my 3 favorite journal prompts and also giving you some tips on how to incorporate those themes into your life to maximize your fulfillment this season. How I'm able to take these powerful themes of this season and actually embody them in a way that allows me to experience more fullness and freedom and fun in my everyday life, regardless of what's going on. So I invite you to check that one out, and I'll see you there.